The warp screamed. Brother Captain Artemius of the Ultramarines felt it through the Geller fields failing. Harmonics, reality tearing like parchment beneath a chained word. The sword of Macridge, a strike cruiser that had weathered 10,000 years of mankind's eternal war, shuddered as something fundamental broke in the fabric of space. Alarms shrieked through Gothic corridors. Servitors wailed binary prayers to the Omnicia, and the navigator, 3 decks below in her sanctum, began screaming words that would have driven lesser men irrevocably mad. Geller field integrity at 40%, intoned Techmarine Vastian, his voice crackling with machine prayer static. The warp. Brother Captain, the warp is wrong. Artemius gripped the command throne's armrests, his power-armored fingers leaving impressions in the ancient metal. Through his helm's display, he watched the impossible unfold. The warp, the roiling hell dimension through which all Imperial vessels traveled. That realm of demons and dark gods that had plagued humanity since the fall was changing. The familiar screaming faces of the never-born, the grasping claws of entities that hungered for mortal souls, were being pushed aside, replaced by something else entirely. Something calm, organized, utterly alien to the Imperium's understanding of the Immaterium. Translation to real space in 10 seconds. The ship's cogitator blared. 9, 8, 7. The universe inverted. When the sword of Macridge burst back into reality, it did not emerge into the war-torn Gothic sector that Artemius had left behind, through the viewports, instead of the familiar constellations that every space marine learned during his transformation from mortal to transhuman warrior. There hung stars in configurations that no Imperial astropath had ever charted. Planets orbited in systems that defied the Astronomican's light. And in the distance, massive in a way that made even an Ultramarine's gene-enhanced heart pause, hung a world of impossible geometry, a city that covered an entire planet, gleaming in the light of its sun like a jewel of silver and Duris steel. Auspex reading. Artemius commanded, his voice carrying the authority of Robot Gilliman's bloodline. Multiple signals, Brother Captain. Hundreds of vessels in system. Thousands. Technology readings are inconsistent with any known Xenos or human pattern. Their ships lack warp drives entirely. They're using something else. Some form of faster-than-light travel that doesn't touch the Immaterium at all. Impossible. Mankind had tried for millennia to escape the warp's necessity. But the Immaterium was the only path through the stars humanity had ever mastered. The Emperor himself had not found another way. Yet these ships moved between worlds without ever brushing against the realm of chaos. Multiple contacts approaching, reported the Sensorium servitor. Wedge-shaped vessels, significantly smaller than our cruiser. There, hailing us. On screen, the hololithic display shimmered, and Artemius found himself staring at a human face. Or mostly human. The man wore white armor, sleek and form-fitting, nothing like the blessed ceramite of the Adeptus Astartes. Behind him stood rows of identically armored soldiers, their weapons raised but not yet firing. The man's expression was cautious, professional, but not hostile. Not yet. Unknown vessel. This is Commander CT 7567 of the Grand Army of the Republic. You have entered restricted space around the capital world of Coruscant. Identify yourself and state your intentions. If you are in distress, we can render assistance. The Republic. Coruscant. Words that meant nothing to any database in the Imperium's vast archives. Artemius felt the cold certainty settle into his twin hearts, the certainty that every space marine learned to recognize. They were far, far from the Emperor's light, perhaps farther than any Imperial expedition had ever ventured. This is Brother Captain Artemius of the Ultramarines chapter, Adeptus Astartes, in service to the God Emperor of mankind and the Imperium of man. We have been displaced by a warp anomaly. We mean no hostility to the forces of humanity, but we will defend ourselves if threatened. The commander's expression shifted, confusion, perhaps concern. I'm going to need you to power down your weapons and prepare to be escorted to the Jedi Temple. For debriefing, we're detecting some unusual energy signatures from your ship that need to be investigated. Jedi, another meaningless word, but the tone was clear enough. Submit to inspection or face consequences. Artemius made a swift calculation. The sword of Macridge carried 3 full companies of ultramarines, enough firepower to devastate a hive world. But those vessels surrounding them numbered in the dozens, with more arriving every moment. And somewhere on that planet city ahead, there would be answers. Answers about where they were, how to return to the Imperium, and whether this republic represented a lost fragment of mankind's ancient empire, or something else entirely. "We will comply," Artemius said, though the words tasted like ash. "But be aware, we are the Emperor's angels of death. We do not disarm lightly." As the Republic vessels formed an escort pattern around the strike cruiser, guiding it toward the massive planet ahead, Artemius opened a Vox channel to his chaplain. "Brother Thalios, prepare the men. We walk among humans who do not know the Emperor's name, who live without his light. Whatever we find on that world below." He paused, watching the city planet grow larger in the viewport, its spires reaching into the clouds like the hives of Holy Terra itself, yet somehow cleaner, brighter, untouched by the grime of 40 millennia of war. "We must be ready for anything." In the temple hangar bay, Jedi Master Mace Windu stood with crossed arms, watching the incoming vessel. Through the Force, he felt it, approaching like a wound-in reality, a presence so saturated with warfare, with grim purpose and unshakable faith, that it made even his battle-hardened spirit recoil. Whatever these newcomers were, they were warriors. Warriors who had seen things that would break lesser beings. Warriors who carried death like a second skin. Beside him, Master Yoda's ears twitched, his ancient eyes narrowing. Troubled, the Force is. These strangers, familiar yet alien, they feel. Known to the Force, yet not. A shadow from far away, perhaps, or a warning of what may come. "They claim to serve an emperor," Mace said quietly. "An empire of man. But I sense no deception in their transmission. They believe what they say." "Believe, yes. Truth." Yoda's staff tapped the polished floor. "Another question, that is." The Gothic warship settled into the hangar with a grace that belied its brutal architecture. It was a cathedral given flight, all spires and buttresses, covered in high Gothic script and purity seals, skulls adorning every surface. The hangar's blast doors groaned as they strained to accommodate its bulk. Then, with a hiss of pressurizing atmosphere, a boarding ramp extended from the vessel's side. What emerged made even Mace Windu's hand drift toward his lightsaber. They were giants. Each stood nearly 8 feet tall, encased in armor of deep blue ceramite decorated with golden ultramarines iconography. Their shoulder guards bore the Ultima symbol, and their helms were fashioned into images of noble, stern faces. They moved with perfect synchronization, bolt weapons held at rest, but ready to snap into firing position in a heartbeat. At their head walked one whose armor bore additional honors, campaign badges, purity seals, and a winged skull upon his breastplate. Brother Captain Artemius removed his helmet as he reached the bottom of the ramp, revealing a face that was classically handsome, yet somehow wrong. Too perfect, too symmetrical, as if sculpted rather than born. His eyes scanned the assembled Jedi with tactical precision, categorizing threats and calculating firing solutions, even as he offered a slight nod of acknowledgement. "Masters of the Jedi Temple," he said, his voice carrying easily across the hangar without technological amplification. "I am Brother Captain Artemius of the Ultramarines. We come in peace, though we are forever prepared for war. We seek knowledge of how we came to be here, and how we might return to our Imperium. If you can provide such knowledge, the Emperor's blessing be upon you." Mace stepped forward, his presence commanding despite being dwarfed by the armored giants. "I am Mace Windu, Master of the Jedi Order. This is Grand Master Yoda. We welcome you to Coruscant. Though I confess, we have many questions about your arrival, your ship." It appeared to tear through space itself. The disturbance in the Force was unlike anything we've felt before. "The Force?" Artemius's expression hardened almost imperceptibly. "Explain this term." "The Force is the energy that binds all living things," Mace said carefully, sensing the sudden tension in the armored warrior. "It flows through the galaxy, connects everything. Those of us trained in its ways can sense emotions, predict danger, even move objects with thought alone. Surely in your travels, you've encountered witchcraft," Artemius interrupted. and his hand moved to the bolt pistol at his hip. Behind him, every ultramarine tensed as one. You speak of psychic powers, of the warp's corruption given form. Tell me, Master Windu, do your force wielders hear whispers in their minds? Do they see things that should not be? Do they traffic with entities from beyond the veil of reality? The temperature in the hangar seemed to drop 10 degrees. Yoda's eyes widened slightly, his connection to the force revealing the depth of threat these warriors represented. They weren't hostile, not yet, but they were zealots. True believers in a faith that saw any unexplained power as heresy. The Force is not corruption, Mace said, his voice steady despite the danger crackling in the air. It is life itself. We are peacekeepers, not witches. Servants of the Republic, sworn to defend the innocent and uphold justice. Whatever you've encountered in your empire, whatever warp you speak of, it is not what we practice here. Artemius studied the Jedi Master for a long moment, his enhanced mind processing thousands of tactical variables. Finally, he relaxed fractionally, though his hand remained near his weapon. Perhaps. We have much to discuss, it seems. But know this, the Imperium has stood for 10,000 years because we do not tolerate the corruption of mankind's soul. If your force proves to be the warp by another name, if your practitioners prove to be psychers, without the Emperor's sanction, let the threat hang unspoken. Then we shall demonstrate what we are, Yoda said, his voice carrying surprising strength for one so small. And learn what you are, we shall. Much to discuss, yes, but done in council, it should be, not in Hangar Bay, with weapons so close to hand. As the Jedi led the Ultramarines deeper into the temple, neither side noticed the faint ripple that passed through the Force, or perhaps through something else, something that existed adjacent to the Force, parallel to it. In the darkest corners of Coruscant's underworld, in the spaces between stars where no light reached, something stirred, something that had followed the sword of Makridge through the tear in reality. The warp had not let the Ultramarines go freely. It had merely chosen to follow them into this new, pristine galaxy. And in the shadows, hidden behind political masks and Sith sorcery, Darth Sidious felt the disturbance and smiled. These warriors from beyond the stars, with their fanatical faith and casual brutality, their weapons that roared like thunder and their absolute certainty of purpose, they were exactly what he needed. The Jedi would never see it coming. If you want to see more universe-shattering crossovers exploring impossible collisions of power and philosophy, hit that subscribe button and drop the name of 2 universes you'd want to see clash in the comments below. In the grim darkness of the far future, there is only war, but perhaps, just perhaps, there is also hope. The Jedi Council chamber occupied the highest spire of the temple, a circular room of polished stone where 12 seats formed a ring beneath transparent steel windows that offered a panoramic view of Coruscant's endless cityscape. Normally, the space radiated tranquility, the collected wisdom of the galaxy's peacekeepers, deliberating on matters of galactic importance with calm detachment. Today, the Force itself felt agitated, disturbed by the presence of the 5 armored giants who stood at the chamber's center. Brother Captain, Artemius had brought 4 of his most trusted warriors, Brother Sergeant Octavian, Apothecary Helix, Techmarine Vastian, and Chaplain Thalios, whose black armor and skull-faced helm made several Jedi visibly uncomfortable. They stood at parade rest, bolt weapons mag-locked to their thigh plates, but every Jedi in the chamber could sense the coiled readiness in their enhanced bodies. These were not men accustomed to being disarmed, physically or philosophically. Master Yoda occupied his customary seat, his Jimmer stick resting across his lap, his ancient eyes studying the Ultramarines with an intensity that suggested he was perceiving far more than their physical forms. Beside him sat Mace Windu, his expression carved from stone. The other council members, Hyadimundi, Plo Koon, Shak Ti, Kit Fisto, and others, maintained varying degrees of wariness and curiosity. Strange journey yours has been, Yoda began, his voice filling the chamber despite its quietness. Through what you call the warp you traveled, a realm of, what did you name it? Chaos and demons. The warp is the immaterium, Artemius explained. his voice carrying the patient cadence of one reciting catechism, a dimension of psychic energy that underlies real space. It is mankind's curse and necessity, the only known path for faster than light travel. But it is not empty. The warp is home to entities of malevolence beyond mortal comprehension. The four ruinous powers and their demonic legions seek constantly to corrupt humanity, to drag souls into eternal torment. Only through the God Emperor's divine light and the strictest discipline can we navigate it safely. And this emperor of yours, Mace said, leaning forward. You call him a god. You worship him as divine. Yet you speak of him as if he were a man who once lived. Chaplain Thalios stepped forward, his voice resonating from his skull helm's vox grill like a pronouncement from the grave. The Emperor is the master of mankind, the Omniscia, the Astronomican's light. 10,000 years ago, he sacrificed himself to save humanity from extinction. And now he sits upon the golden throne on holy Terra, his psychic might holding back the tides of chaos while illuminating the warp so that mankind's ships might find their way home. He is God and man. He is Father and Guardian. To question his divinity is heresy. The temperature dropped further. Several Jedi exchanged glances. We question nothing, Mace said carefully. We seek understanding. In our galaxy, we have encountered many beings of great power, beings who inspire worship. But in our experience, absolute devotion to any single individual, no matter how powerful, leads to tyranny and suffering. Then your experience is limited, Thalios replied, his tone brooking no argument. The Imperium spans 1,000,000 worlds. Countless billions live and die under the Emperor's protection. Without his light, without the strictures of faith that bind our civilization together, mankind would have been consumed by chaos 10 millennia past. Your republic, he gestured dismissively at the sprawling city beyond the windows. How many worlds does it claim? How long has it stood? The Republic has endured for over 1,000 generations, Cutimundi said, his tall form rising from his seat. 25,000 years of peace, democracy, and prosperity. We have achieved this not through authoritarian faith, but through cooperation, the guidance of the Jedi Order, and the will of the Senate. The Force has shown us that diversity of thought and freedom of choice lead to freedom. Thalios laughed, the sound harsh and metallic through his vox grill. Freedom is the lie that chaos whispers to the weak. Freedom is what allows corruption to take root. Freedom is what destroys civilizations from within. The Imperium knows the truth only through unity of purpose, through absolute obedience to the Emperor's will, through the extermination of heresy wherever it appears. Can mankind survive in a universe that hungers for our extinction? Interesting perspective, that is, Yoda said, his voice cutting through the rising tension like a blade. Yet sense much fear in you, I do. Fear of this chaos. Fear of corruption. Fear of freedom itself. Rule through fear. Does your Imperium? Artemius spoke before Thalios could respond, his voice more measured but no less absolute. We rule through necessity, Grand Master. You speak of 25,000 years of peace. We speak of 40,000 years of war. Every day, humanity fights for survival against Xeno's horrors you cannot imagine. The Tyranids, who consume all biomass in their path. The Orcs, who exist only for violence and whose numbers blot out stars. The Necrons, ancient machines older than our species who seek to harvest all life. The Eldar, whose empire's depravity literally gave birth to a chaos. God, and beneath it all, the ruinous powers themselves, seeking any crack in humanity's faith through which to pour their corruption. He paused, letting his words sink in. Your galaxy appears peaceful, masters. Your republic stands unchallenged. Your force grants you powers without consequence. But I tell you now, this peace is an aberration. The universe is a dark and terrible place. And if you have not learned this truth, it is only because you have not yet faced what lurks in the shadows. Plo Koon, his breathing mask hissing softly, spoke with the measured tones of a peacemaker. Perhaps our experiences differ because our galaxies differ. You speak of entities that feed on negative emotion, anger, hate, fear. In our galaxy, the Force has shown us that such emotions lead to the dark side, to corruption and suffering. But we have learned to resist them through discipline, compassion, and inner peace. Perhaps your chaos is simply what happens when an entire civilization embraces fear and hate as survival mechanisms. The Ultramarines went very still. Even through their armor, the Jedi could feel the surge of controlled anger. You dare, Thalios began, his hand moving to the Crozius Arcanum at his belt. Peace, brother, Artemius said quietly, though his own jaw was clenched. They speak from ignorance, not malice. They have not seen what we have seen. He turned to address the council directly. Masters, I understand that our ways seem harsh to you. Brutal, even. But understand, every stricture of the imperial creed, every act of zealous faith, every execution for heresy, these are not the acts of tyrants, but of survivors. We are not cruel because we enjoy cruelty. We are cruel because the alternative is extinction. Yet cruelty breeds cruelty, Shakti said gently, her voice musical despite the gravity of the topic. When you teach your people that mercy is weakness, that questioning is heresy, that any deviation from orthodoxy deserves death, do you not create the very darkness you claim to fight? Apothecary Helix, who had remained silent until now, spoke with the clinical detachment of a healer who had seen too much. In my centuries of service, I have extracted the gene seed from fallen brothers on 1,000 worlds. I have seen space. Marines die screaming as chaos corruption dissolved their bodies from within. I have treated guardsmen whose minds were broken by demonic possession, who begged me to kill them rather than let the voices continue. I have burned entire populations when the taint of the warp spread too far to be contained. His voice, normally emotionless, carried a weight of terrible experience. So when you ask if our cruelty breeds darkness, yes. Yes, it does. But the darkness was already there, masters. We simply acknowledged it and built our civilization accordingly. The chamber fell silent. Through the Force, the Jedi could feel the sincerity of the Ultramarines' belief, the depth of their conviction, and the genuine horror of what they had witnessed across 40 millennia of warfare. These were not madmen or tyrants. They were soldiers who had stared into an abyss so profound that it had fundamentally reshaped their understanding of existence. And yet, tell me about your emperor, Yoda said softly. This man who became a god. What was he before his sacrifice? What did he teach? Artemius's expression softened. Fractionally, the only sign of emotion the stoic warrior had shown since entering the chamber. The emperor was the greatest of all men, a being of unmatched psychic might, born in ancient Terra's prehistory, who guided humanity through the darkness of old night and reunited our species after the age of strife. He created us, the Adeptus Astartes, his angels of death, from his own genetic template. He forged 20 sons, the Primarchs, to be his generals in the Great Crusade. He sought to bring reason and science to the galaxy, to free mankind from superstition and fear. Reason and science? Mace's eyebrow rose. Yet now you worship him as a god, build cathedrals in his name, execute those who question his divinity. That seems contradictory. The Ultramarines exchanged glances. Finally, Chaplain Thalios spoke, his voice heavy with something that might have been regret. The Emperor forbade worship. He declared that there were no gods, only beings of greater and lesser power. He sought to build a secular imperium, free from religious dogma. He paused. That was before the heresy, before half his sons turned traitor and nearly destroyed everything he had built, before he was forced to sit upon the golden throne, locked in eternal psychic battle with the dark gods themselves. We learned, masters, we learned that faith is a weapon against chaos, that belief in the Emperor's divinity grants protection that reason alone cannot provide. The imperial creed is not a contradiction of his vision. It is the evolution of it, adapted to the truth of the universe as it exists, not as we wish it to be. How very pragmatic, Kit Fisto said, his tentacles twitching with unease. Yet also how dangerous. Once you abandon objective truth in favor of useful fictions, where does it end? It ends with humanity's survival, Artemius said flatly. That is all that matters. Before the Jedi could respond, the chamber doors hissed open. A protocol droid scurried in, its movements agitated. Masters, forgive the intrusion, but Chancellor Palpatine has requested an immediate audience with the Council and our guests. He insisted as a matter of galactic security. The Jedi exchanged looks. Yoda's ears drooped slightly. Informed the Chancellor. We were that these proceedings should remain confidential. The Chancellor was most insistent, Master Yoda. He said, and I quote, I cannot in good conscience allow armed warriors of unknown origin to meet with the Jedi Council without the Republic's elected leadership being present. The Senate has a right to know who has entered our space. Mace sighed. Politics. Always politics. Very well. Inform the Chancellor that he may join us, along with appropriate senatorial representation. As the droid departed, Artemius turned to his brothers. This Chancellor, he leads your republic. In theory, Mace said. In practice, the Senate leads, and the Chancellor executes their will. It is a democracy, Captain. Power is distributed, not concentrated. Inefficient, Techmarine Vastian observed. Decision-making by committee during crisis leads to paralysis and defeat. The Imperium learned this truth during the Age of Strife. Unity of command is essential. Unity of command can also mean tyranny, Shakti countered. One voice, no matter how wise, cannot account for the needs and perspectives of billions of beings, which is precisely why the Imperium fails more often than it succeeds. A new voice said from the doorway. Every head turned. Chancellor. Palpatine entered the chamber with the measured grace of a career politician, flanked by Senate guards and several senators including Bail Organa and Padme Amidala. The Chancellor was elderly, his face lined with care, his robes simple but elegant. His eyes, however, those eyes swept across the Ultramarines with an intensity that made even Artemius pause. There was something in that gaze, something that tugged at senses the Space Marines barely understood. Forgive my interruption. Masters, Palpatine said, his voice grandfatherly and warm. But when word reached me that beings from beyond our galaxy had arrived, warriors who speak of gods and demons, I felt it my duty to assess the situation personally. The Republic has not survived this long by being naive to potential threats. He turned to the Ultramarines, and his smile was disarming. Welcome to Coruscant, gentlemen. I am Supreme Chancellor Palpatine. Please, tell me, what brings the Imperium of Man to our humble republic? Artemius studied the Chancellor for a long moment. There was something about this man, something that set his gene-enhanced instincts on edge, a feeling he couldn't quite place. We seek knowledge, Chancellor, knowledge of how we came to be here, and how we might return to our Imperium. We mean your republic no harm. Unless we prove to be heretics, Palpatine said, still smiling. Unless our use of what you call psychic powers marks us for extermination in your eyes. I've been briefed on your initial conversation with the Jedi, Captain. Your Imperium sounds uncompromising in its views. Compromise is death, Chaplain Thalios said flatly. Half measures allowed the heresy to nearly destroy mankind. Never again. Ah, yes. Your heresy. Palpatine moved to the center of the chamber, his hands clasped behind his back. Half your Emperor's sons turned traitor, you said. Betrayed everything they had built. Tell me, Captain, what caused such a catastrophic failure? How does an empire that claims absolute loyalty and unwavering faith lose half its greatest warriors to rebellion? The Ultramarines stiffened. This was dangerous ground. The heresy was caused by chaos, Artemius said carefully. By the lies of the ruinous powers, who corrupted my brothers through promises of power and freedom from the Emperor's vision. But surely, Padme Amidala interjected, her voice carrying the passion of a true believer in democracy. Such corruption could only take root where there was already discontent, where warriors felt stifled, controlled, denied the freedom to think and question. Freedom to question is freedom to fall, Thalios snapped. The traitor Primarchs questioned the Emperor's wisdom. They sought power beyond what he had granted them, and in their pride, they doomed the Imperium to eternal war. Or, Bail Organa said quietly, they rebelled against an authoritarian regime that treated them as weapons rather than beings with their own agency and dignity. Forgive me, Captain, but from what you've described, your Imperium sounds less like a beacon of humanity and more like the very tyranny we fight to prevent. The chamber erupted. Multiple Jedi rose from their seats, calling for calm. The Ultramarines shifted into defensive positions, hands moving to weapons. And through it all, Chancellor Palpatine watched with eyes that glittered with something that might have been satisfaction. Peace. Yoda's voice cracked like thunder, his diminutive form somehow filling the chamber with presence. The Force surged, and everyone, Jedi, senators, and even the Ultramarines, felt it. Accomplished nothing, this argument does. Different, our civilizations are. Different, our challenges have been. Judge each other, we should not. Until understand each other, we do. He turned his gaze on Palpatine, and for just a moment, something flickered in the Force, a shadow, quickly suppressed. Chancellor, appreciate your concern, we do. But discuss these matters in council, we should, before involving the Senate. Delicate, this situation is. Careful, we must be. Palpatine inclined his head, seemingly accepting the rebuke. But his smile never wavered. Of course, Master Yoda. Though I suspect the Senate will have questions regardless. Warriors who speak of demon-infested dimensions and 10,000 years of war. He glanced at the Ultramarines. Such things will not remain secret for long on Coruscant. As the Chancellor and his entourage departed, Artemius watched him go with growing unease. There was something wrong about that man. Something that resonated on frequencies his warp-sensitive implants barely registered. It wasn't the same as the Jedi's Force. Their power felt natural, if heretical. But Palpatine, Brother Captain, Vastian voxed on a private channel. My auspex registered anomalous readings from the Chancellor. Bioelectric patterns inconsistent with baseline human norms. Recommendation: increased vigilance. Agreed, Artemius responded. I don't trust him. Neither did Mace Windu, though for different reasons. As he watched the Chancellor leave, he reached out through the Force, trying to sense the man's intentions. But as always with Palpatine, there was nothing, a void where emotions should be. A blank space that somehow deflected scrutiny without being obvious about it. Troubled, you seem, Yoda observed. These Ultramarines, Mace said quietly. They speak of absolute faith and brutal necessity. Of a universe so dark that mercy becomes weakness. If their philosophy spreads. He didn't finish the thought. Yes, Yoda said, his voice heavy with concern. Much like the Sith, their certainty is. Much like the dark side, their teachings sound. Yet sense true evil in them, I do not. Misguided perhaps. Traumatized by horrors we cannot imagine. But evil? No. Then what are they? Yoda was quiet for a long moment, his eyes distant. Survivors, perhaps. Survivors of a universe far darker than ours. And if such darkness exists, he turned to look at Mace, his ancient face grave. Then perhaps threaten our galaxy. It could. Perhaps warn us, these warriors do, of what may come if vigilant we are not. In the temple's depths, in a meditation chamber far from the council room, a young Jedi Knight named Anakin Skywalker sat in restless contemplation. He had felt the disturbance when the Imperial ship arrived, felt it like a spike of absolute certainty driven through the Force's usual ambiguity. And he had heard the whispers circulating through the temple. Warriors from beyond the stars. Men who served a god-emperor with unquestioning loyalty. Who believed that peace was a lie and only war could preserve civilization. Part of him recoiled from such philosophy. But another part, the part that had been born in slavery, that had lost his mother to violence, that grew increasingly frustrated with the Jedi Council's endless deliberation and political maneuvering, that part wondered, what if they were right? The Jedi Temple's training halls had witnessed 10,000 years of lightsaber forms, Force meditation, and youngling instruction. Today, they bore witness to something entirely different. Brother Sergeant Octavian moved through the sparring circle with mechanical precision. His combat blade, a weapon that hummed with disruption field energy, meeting Jedi Knight Anakin Skywalker's blue lightsaber in a shower of sparks. The clash of technologies sent ionized air crackling across the chamber. Around them, dozens of Jedi and several Ultramarines watched in fascination as two completely different warrior traditions tested each other. Your weapon, Octavian observed, his augmented reflexes allowing him to track the lightsaber's impossible speed, is elegant, efficient, pure energy given form. He parried another strike, his armor's servos compensating for the Space Marine's massive bulk. But it lacks the Emperor's blessing. It is merely a tool, not a holy relic. "The Force guides my blade," Anakin replied, sweat beading on his forehead as he faced an opponent who should have been too large, too armored to move with such speed. Not faith in some distant emperor. "Your Force," Octavian pressed forward, forcing Anakin to give ground. "Is it not simply psychic power by another name? The ability to manipulate reality through will alone." "The Force isn't manipulation," Anakin grunted, switching to Jim So's aggressive form, redirecting the Space Marine's strength against him. "It's connection, understanding. It flows through all living things, binds the galaxy together. When I fight, I don't impose my will. I let the Force guide me." "Heresy wrapped in philosophy," Octavian said, but there was curiosity rather than condemnation in his tone. "You claim not to impose will, yet you move objects with thought. You claim connection, yet you read emotions without permission. These are the hallmarks of psychers, Knight Skywalker. Unsanctioned psychers who would face the black ships in the Imperium. Their weapons locked, transhuman strength meeting Force-enhanced prowess." For a moment, neither gave ground. "Tell me something," Anakin said, his voice low enough that only Octavian could hear. "Your Emperor, you call him a god, but he was a man once, wasn't he? A psyker so powerful he conquered the galaxy. What makes him different from what you call heresy?" Octavian's expression behind his helm was unreadable, but his stance shifted fractionally. The Emperor was sanctioned by his own might. He proved through 10,000 years of leadership that his power served humanity, not chaos. He established the structures, the Adeptus Astra Telepathica, the black ships, the sanctioning procedures that allow controlled psychers to serve without falling to corruption. He is the only being powerful enough to hold back the dark gods. That is what makes him divine. "So might makes right?" Anakin pressed. "Power justifies authority?" "No." Octavian disengaged, stepping back and deactivating his combat blade. "Responsibility justifies authority. The Emperor bore the weight of humanity's survival. He earned his authority through sacrifice, not mere power. There is a difference." Anakin deactivated his lightsaber, considering. Around them, the watching crowd murmured with approval at the display of skill from both warriors. But Anakin's mind was elsewhere, turning over the Space Marine's words, comparing them to the Jedi teachings he'd absorbed for over a decade. "Your turn, I believe," came a gravelly voice from the chamber's entrance. Obi-Wan Kenobi strode into the training hall, his presence immediately commanding attention. Behind him walked Brother Captain Artemius, the Ultramarine commander's armor bearing fresh purity seals applied by Chaplain Thalios that morning. The two had spent the previous hours in deep discussion, the Jedi Master attempting to understand the Imperium's philosophy, the Space Marine trying to assess whether the Jedi represented a threat or potential ally. "Master Kenobi wishes to test himself against our combat doctrines," Artemius explained to Octavian. "I have agreed, with the stipulation that we fight without lethal force. Consider it cultural exchange." "You're about to fight a Space Marine?" Anakin's eyes widened. "Master, they're 8 feet tall and can punch through durasteel." "Yes, Anakin, I'm aware," Obi-Wan said dryly. "However, size isn't everything. The Force teaches us that. Besides," he glanced at Artemius with a slight smile, "I'm curious to see if all that armor slows him down as much as I suspect." Artemius's helm speakers crackled with what might have been amusement. "You will find, Master Kenobi, that the Adeptus Astartes are designed to eliminate such weaknesses. We are humanity's angels of death, perfect warriors, enhanced beyond mortal limitations." He drew his bolt pistol and combat blade, holding them at rest. "But very well. Let us see if your Force can overcome the Emperor's genetic legacy." They took positions in the sparring circle. The temperature in the hall seemed to drop as the gathered Jedi and Space Marines recognized the significance of what was about to unfold. Not just a sparring match, but a test of philosophies. The Imperium's genetically enhanced transhuman supremacy against the Jedi's Force-guided discipline. Obi-Wan ignited his lightsaber, the blue blade casting sharp shadows across his bearded face. He settled into Sarisu's opening stance, defensive, patient, waiting for the opponent to commit. His breathing slowed. His connection to the Force deepened. Around him, the living energy of the galaxy whispered its insights. Artemius moved with shocking speed for something so large. His bolt pistol came up, not firing. They'd agreed on non-lethal, but the motion itself was a feint. His blade swept in from the side, a blow that would have bisected an unarmored opponent. But Obi-Wan had already moved, guided by precognition, his lightsaber intercepting the strike with millimeter precision. Impressive, Artemius acknowledged, pressing the attack. You anticipated my strike before I made it. The Force shows me possibilities, Obi-Wan replied, his blade weaving a defensive pattern that seemed impossibly elegant. Your muscles tensed. Your weight shifted. The attack was inevitable. Yet you claim this is not witchcraft. I claim it as understanding. Awareness. Obi-Wan redirected another strike, using the Space Marine's momentum against him in a classic Sarisu counter. Your doctrine teaches absolute certainty, Captain, but the Force teaches humility, the recognition that we are part of something greater than ourselves. Artemius adapted instantly, his training in the Codex, Astartes providing counters to techniques from 1,000 worlds. Humility? You wield power that can crush throats with thought, move objects without touching them, influence weak minds. This is not humility, Master Kenobi. This is domination disguised as enlightenment. Their weapons clashed again, faster now. The Space Marines' enhanced reflexes meeting Force-guided prescience. To the observers, it was mesmerizing, brutal strength meeting flowing defense. Transhuman enhancement meeting supernatural insight. Perhaps, Obi-Wan admitted, breathing harder now as the Space Marines' relentless assault tested his stamina. Perhaps the line between power and domination is thinner than I'd like. But the difference lies in how that power is used. The Jedi serve. We do not rule. We defend. We do not conquer. You serve a republic that cannot defend itself without you, Artemius countered. Your very existence proves the Senate's weakness. Remove the Jedi, and your democracy would collapse within a generation. You are the fist inside the velvet glove, Master Kenobi. You simply prefer to pretend otherwise. The words struck deeper than any blade. Obi-Wan faltered for a microsecond, long enough for a warrior of Artemius's caliber to exploit. The Space Marine's blade swept in, stopping a hair's breadth from Obi-Wan's throat. Match to the Ultramarine, Artemius said, stepping back and deactivating his weapon. Your skills are formidable, Master Kenobi. In a prolonged engagement, your Force abilities might well overcome my advantages. But in a single exchange, doubt is death. Obi-Wan deactivated his lightsaber, nodding with genuine respect. You fight with absolute conviction. Every movement certain. Every strike committed. It's remarkable. And terrifying. It is necessary, Artemius replied. Hesitation killed more Space Marines during the heresy than enemy fire ever did. When Horus turned traitor, those who questioned, who doubted, who believed negotiation possible, they died first. The loyalists who survived learned the hardest lesson. When facing true evil, there can be no middle ground. But what if you're wrong? Obi-Wan pressed. What if your true evil is actually someone who could be redeemed? Someone who fell due to trauma or manipulation, not inherent corruption? Your doctrine leaves no room for salvation, Captain. Only execution. Because salvation is a luxury we cannot afford. Chaplain Thalios interjected, striding into the circle, his skullhelm fixed on Obi-Wan with what felt like the gaze of death itself. Master Kenobi, you speak from a position of peace. 25,000 years your republic has stood, largely, unmolested by existential threats. You have time for redemption, time for second chances, time to debate ethics and philosophy. His voice dropped to a near whisper that somehow carried across the hall. The Imperium has no such luxury. We fight every moment of every day against extinction. When a brother falls to chaos, when a world turns traitor, when a psyker opens a rift to the warp, we have seconds to respond. Not days, not hours, seconds. And in those seconds, mercy is not compassion. It is dereliction of duty. The chamber fell silent. Even the assembled Jedi, accustomed to difficult truths, seemed shaken by the absolute bleakness of that worldview. Then I pity you, Obi-Wan said quietly. Not as weakness, but as genuine sorrow. To live in a universe so dark that compassion becomes liability. I cannot imagine such horror. You do not need to imagine it, a new voice said. Every head turned. In the doorway stood Apothecary Helix, his white armor marked with the red prime helix of his order. In his hands, he carried what looked like a portable hololithic projector. Imperial technology, brutal and functional compared to Republic aesthetics. Brother Captain, Helix said, forgive my interruption, but I believe these Jedi should understand what we have faced. What drives our doctrines? Permission to display campaign recordings? Artemius hesitated. The images Helix carried were not meant for civilians. They showed the Imperium at its most brutal, its most necessary, its most damning. But perhaps that was exactly what needed to be shown. Granted, he said finally, but show only what is necessary for understanding, not the worst. Helix activated the projector. The training hall's lights dimmed, and across the walls appeared images from 40,000 years of warfare. A hive world, burning, not from orbital bombardment, but from within. Chaos cultists had summoned a demon prince, and the Inquisition had declared exterminatus. 10 billion souls consumed, by fire to prevent quadrillions. More from falling to corruption. A space marine of the Blood Angels, his armor cracked and bleeding, standing over the body of a fallen brother who had succumbed to the red thirst. The living marine's face showed no triumph, only exhaustion and grief. A black ship arriving at a world to collect psychers. Children mostly. Some would be sanctioned. Others would feed the Golden Throne. Their souls consumed to keep the Astronomicon burning. All would be taken from their families, never to return. A guard regiment making a last stand against a tyrannid swarm. The numbers were impossible. Millions of alien horrors against thousands of humans. Yet they held, because retreat would doom the world behind them. They fought until the bioforms devoured every last guardsman. An inquisitor executing a space marine. Captain who had shown mercy to a corrupted world. The captain had believed redemption was possible. The world fell to chaos 6 months later. Billions died. The Inquisitor had been right. Mercy had been weakness. Frame after frame of unrelenting grimness. Not glory, not triumph. Just survival purchased at costs that broke the human spirit. When the display ended, several Jedi were visibly shaken. Padawan Ahsoka Tano, who had entered during the sparring match, looked like she might be sick. Even Anakin, who had seen war on countless fronts, appeared disturbed by the casual brutality on display. This, Helix said quietly, is every day for the Imperium. This is not propaganda. This is not exaggeration. This is our reality. When you ask why we have no room for mercy, why we execute heretics without trial, why we burn worlds that might be saved, this is why. Because the alternative is worse. There has to be another way, Ahsoka said, her voice trembling slightly. There has to be. You can't give up on compassion, on hope, on the belief that people can change. Hope is the first step on the road to disappointment, Thalios quoted. It is also the first lie chaos whispers. Hope that you can control the power. Hope that you can use it for good. Hope that you are special, different, strong enough to resist. And then, when you are weakest, when you have opened yourself to that hope, that is when the corruption takes root. So you believe in nothing? Obi-Wan challenged. No hope, no mercy, no redemption. Just endless war and brutal pragmatism. We believe in the Emperor, Artemius said. We believe in humanity's survival. We believe that our sacrifices, no matter how terrible, serve a purpose greater than ourselves. Is that not faith, Master Kenobi? Is that not hope? Just hope focused on the only thing that matters. Before Obi-Wan could respond, alarms shrieked through the temple. Every Jedi's comlink activated simultaneously, Mace. Windu's voice coming through with unusual urgency. All masters and knights to the council chamber immediately. We have a situation. Senators are dead. Something is wrong with the Force. The Ultramarines' weapons were in their hands before the last word finished echoing. Years of combat response drills had them moving toward defensive positions without conscious thought. Dead. Artemius demanded. What killed them? Unknown, came Mace's grim reply over the comlink. But Master Yoda says the Force is screaming. Something from your ship, Captain. Something that came with you through your warp. It's here, on Coruscant. Artemius felt ice flood his veins. Brother Helix, activate your auspex. Full spectrum scan. If something followed us through. Already scanning. Helix reported, his armor-mounted sensors deploying. Brother Captain, I'm detecting warp signatures. Multiple contacts. Spreading through the lower levels of the temple. They're not strong. Nothing like a greater demon. But they're present. The veil between real space and the immaterium is thin here, thinner than it should be. Chaos. Thalios breathed, his voice carrying equal parts dread and rage. We brought chaos to their galaxy. Impossible, Vastian said, his techmarine training making him check and double-check the readings. The warp here is calm, orderly. It shouldn't be possible for demonic entities to manifest in real space without massive psychic upheaval. Unless he trailed off, but Artemius understood. Unless the warp here was different. Unless chaos had evolved, adapted to this new galaxy's strange force-saturated reality. Unless they had not escaped the Dark God's notice after all. We need to reach your council, Artemius said to Obi-Wan, already moving toward the exit. Now, if chaos has found a foothold here, if it's learning to manipulate your force, then everyone is in danger, Obi-Wan finished, his earlier philosophical disagreements forgotten in the face of immediate threat. Come on. As Jedi and Space Marines rushed through the temple corridors, none of them noticed the faint shimmer in the shadows. The way the darkness seemed just slightly deeper than it should be. The way certain statues, if glimpsed from the corner of one's eye, appeared to be grinning. And far below, in Coruscant's industrial undercity where light never reached and millions lived in perpetual darkness, something stirred, something that had ridden the sword of Macridge through the warp, clinging to the Geller field's outer membrane, waiting for the right moment to slip into this pristine, unprepared galaxy. The ruinous powers had found a new playground, and unlike the Imperium, hardened by 40 millennia of war, the Republic had no idea what was coming. In his office in the Senate building, Darth Sidious felt the disturbance and smiled. Chaos, the Ultramarines called it. Entities that fed on emotion, that corrupted through whispered promises of power, that turned hope into despair and faith into fanaticism. It sounded remarkably similar to the dark side of the Force. Perhaps, the Dark Lord mused. These two power systems were not so different after all. Perhaps they could be combined, exploited, used to reshape the galaxy according to a vision that neither Jedi nor Imperium could imagine. The Clone Wars had been merely preparation. But this was opportunity on a scale even he had not dared dream. Let the Jedi and their new allies fight. Let them reveal their strengths and weaknesses. And when they were exhausted, when they believed the threat contained, he would make his move. Order 66 would be just the beginning. The Senate Rotunda was a monument to democracy, circular tiers, rising hundreds of meters, each level filled with repulsorbids representing thousands of worlds. It was designed to inspire awe, to remind every being present that they were part of something greater than themselves. A republic that spanned the galaxy and endured for millennia. Today, it was a charnel house. Senator Karras of the Grand Protectorate lay sprawled across his pod's controls, his three eyes staring sightlessly at the vaulted ceiling. His skin had turned an unnatural gray, veins visible beneath the surface like dark cracks in porcelain. Around him, for more senators displayed similar symptoms, death without visible wounds. Bodies corrupted from within by something that left no forensic evidence. This is the third incident in 6 hours, Mace Windu said, his voice tight with controlled anger. He stood in the center of the rotunda floor, surrounded by Jedi Knights performing force-based analysis while Republic security forces established perimeters. 5 senators dead, 12 aides, 3 security officers, all showing the same symptoms: sudden cellular degradation, psychological trauma preceding death. And he paused, clearly disturbed. Reports from survivors nearby that they heard the victims talking to themselves, saying things that made no sense, speaking languages that don't exist in any Republic database. Beside him, Brother Captain Artemius knelt next to Senator Karras's body, his armor's Auspex array extended and scanning. The readings made his jaw clench behind his helm. These are warp signatures. Weak, but unmistakable. Your senator was touched by something from the immaterium, something that corrupted him from within, feeding on his fears and ambitions until his mind broke. Demons? Chancellor Palpatine asked, his voice carefully modulated to convey concern rather than the fascination that lurked beneath. He stood on the Chancellor's pod, flanked by Senate guards, observing the investigation with apparent grave interest. You spoke of such entities. Are you saying these people were killed by supernatural beings from your dimension? Not killed, Chaplain Thalios corrected, his skullhelm surveying the scene with practiced efficiency. Possessed, or rather, partially possessed. The warp here is too calm, too ordered for full demonic manifestation. But lesser entities, never born of the lowest order, warp-spawn parasites, could piggyback on our arrival, could seep through the cracks in reality our passage created. That's not possible, Mundi said flatly. The Syrian Jedi Master stood with arms crossed, his expression skeptical despite the evidence before him. The Force permeates all living things. We would sense any external entity attempting to possess or corrupt a sentient being. There has never been a documented case of. Because you've never faced chaos, Artemius interrupted. Master Mundi, your force is not the warp. It may be related, perhaps parallel dimensions of psychic energy, but they are not identical. The warp exists in the space between thoughts, in the dark corners of ambition and fear. It doesn't announce itself with force signatures that you're trained to detect. It whispers. It corrupts slowly. And by the time you realize something is wrong, it's already too late. Obi-Wan Kenobi moved to examine another body, reaching out through the force to sense the lingering echoes of the victim's last moments. What he found made him recoil. It wasn't the usual pattern of death, the fading of life energy, the dissolution of consciousness. This was something else, something hungry, as if the victim's death had been consumed, fed upon by an intelligence that existed just outside the Force's normal spectrum. I sensed something, he admitted reluctantly. Not through the Force exactly, but adjacent to it. Like hearing a conversation through a wall, the words are muffled, but you know something is being said. He turned to Artemius. You've fought these entities before. How do we stop them? Prayer, faith, absolute conviction in the Emperor's protection. Thalios said immediately. But you lack all three. Your Jedi cannot wield the rites that have kept chaos at bay for 10,000 years. You don't even believe in the God Emperor's divinity. Then teach us, Mace Windu said. Whatever differences we have philosophically, we face a common threat. If these entities are spreading through Coruscant, killing our people, we need to know how to fight them. Artemius exchanged glances with his brothers. It was a reasonable request, but it put them in an impossible position. To teach the Jedi Imperial doctrine would be to validate their heretical force-wielding. To refuse would be to abandon innocence to chaos corruption. The Codex Astartes provided no guidance for such a scenario. The fundamental problem, Apothecary Helix said, stepping forward with his medical aspects still analyzing the bodies, is that chaos feeds on emotion, fear, anger, ambition, despair. These are the paths through which corruption enters. The Imperium survives because we have spent 40 millennia building psychological defenses. Faith in the Emperor provides an absolute framework that chaos cannot easily corrupt. But you, he gestured to the assembled Jedi, you acknowledge emotion. You seek to understand it, to manage it through mindfulness and discipline. Noble, perhaps, but vulnerable. The dark side, Yoda said quietly, leaning heavily on his Jimmer stick as he approached the scene. The ancient Jedi Master's ears were drooped, his expression grave. Similar to what you describe, it is. Feed on negative emotion, the dark side does. Twist good intentions into evil actions. Lead Jedi to fall, it can. Perhaps. Related, these phenomena are. The dark side? Artemius seized on the term. Explain. The Force has two aspects, Mace explained. The living force, which flows through all things, connects life to life. And the dark side, a corruption, or perhaps perversion, of the Force. It offers power through anger, fear, and hatred. Those who embrace it gain strength, but lose themselves in the process. The Sith are dark side users, our ancient enemies. They nearly destroyed the Jedi Order thousands of years ago. And where are these Sith now? Thalios asked sharply. Extinct, Mundi said with certainty. The last Sith Lords died a millennium ago. The Jedi hunted them down, destroyed their order. We've maintained vigilance ever since. But there have been no confirmed Sith sightings in generations. Artemius's enhanced senses detected the lie immediately, not in Mundi's words, but in the Force itself. Yoda's ears twitched. Mace's expression tightened fractionally. The Jedi believed what they said, But the Force knew better. Somewhere in this galaxy, the dark side persisted. And if it was truly similar to chaos, your Sith may not be as extinct as you believe, Artemius said carefully. In our experience, chaos never truly dies. It adapts. It hides. It waits for moments of weakness to resurge. If your dark side operates on similar principles, an explosion rocked the rotunda. Not a physical blast, but something worse, a psychic shockwave that made every Force-sensitive present cry out in pain. Yoda collapsed, catching himself on his staff. Mace dropped to one knee, his hand pressed to his forehead. Even the Ultramarines, with their psychically resistant black carapace implants, felt the wave of wrongness wash over them. Contact! Brother Sergeant Octavian's voice crackled over the Vox. He was stationed with his squad in the lower Senate levels, maintaining a security perimeter. We have visual on hostiles. Repeat. We have. By the throne, what are these things? The sound of bolter fire thundered through the Vox channel. Mass reactive rounds, designed to detonate inside targets, creating wounds that would kill even enhanced organisms. But the firing pattern was erratic, desperate, and beneath it, Artemius could hear something else, screaming. Not human screaming. Something that shouldn't have vocal cords making sounds that shouldn't be possible. All units, converge on Octavian's position, Artemius commanded, already sprinting toward the nearest exit. Behind him, Jedi and Space Marines moved as one. Philosophical differences forgotten in the face of immediate crisis. They descended through the Senate building's levels, passing through corridors of polished stone and elaborate decoration. But as they went deeper, the architecture began to change. Not physically. The walls remained the same, but the atmosphere shifted. The air grew thick. Shadows seemed to move independently of their light sources. And along the walls, Artemius's helm display began registering fluctuations in real space stability. The warp is bleeding through, Vastian reported, his Techmarine sensors painting a grim picture. Multiple micro-rifts forming throughout this section. Nothing large enough for greater demons. But smaller entities are slipping through. Dozens of them. Perhaps hundreds. They burst into a large assembly hall and found Octavian's squad in a defensive formation, their bolters roaring as they engaged targets that moved through the shadows. Like liquid darkness, the things were vaguely humanoid, elongated limbs, bodies that seemed to shift and writhe as if their physical forms couldn't quite decide what shape to take. Their eyes glowed with sickly luminescence, and their mouths opened impossibly wide, revealing teeth that seemed to extend into dimensions. The human I wasn't meant to perceive. Pink horrors, Thalios identified immediately, his Crozius Arcanum crackling to life. Lesser demons of Tsench, the changer of ways. They feed on ambition and scheming. The Senate, all these politicians, with their plots and counterplots, would be like a feast to them. Then let us send them back to the warp hungry, Artemius growled, raising his bolt pistol. The Ultramarines opened fire with practiced precision. Mass reactive rounds tore through demonic flesh, each impact an explosion that would have shredded any mortal being. Some of the horrors dissolved, their forms unable to maintain cohesion under sustained fire. But others split, one horror becoming two smaller blue horrors, cackling with manic glee as they continued their assault. The Jedi ignited lightsabers, the colored blades casting strange shadows in the corrupted space. Anakin Skywalker leaped forward, his blade slicing through a pink horror with textbook precision. The demon shrieked and split into blues. But Anakin was already moving, his connection to the Force guiding each strike with supernatural accuracy. They're vulnerable to the lightsabers, he called out. The plasma cuts through their physical forms. It's not the plasma, Obi-Wan corrected, his own blade weaving a defensive pattern as horrors swarmed toward him. It's the Force. The Kyber crystals in our lightsabers are Force-attuned. They're cutting through whatever energy these things are made from. Psychic energy, Helix confirmed. His Narthetium arm extended to scan the demons even as he incinerated, one with his flamer. The Force and the warp may be different spectra of the same fundamental phenomenon. Psychic power, shaped by consciousness and will. Your lightsabers are essentially psychic weapons, even if you don't realize it. More horrors poured from the shadows. The air itself seemed to ripple, reality thinning as the boundary between materium and immaterium grew unstable. Through the tears, Artemius could see it, the warp in this galaxy. And it was wrong. So profoundly wrong that it made even his gene-enhanced mind struggle to process. The warp he knew was a screaming maelstrom. Faces in the storm, teeth and claws and hunger. The four gods ruling over their domains of rage, despair, excess, and ambition. It was hell, but it was a hell the Imperium understood. A hell humanity had learned to navigate through faith and sacrifice. This warp was ordered, structured. It had currents and eddies, patterns that almost resembled natural law. And through it flowed something else, the Force, perhaps, or something that existed in parallel to it. Light and dark, divided clearly rather than the warp's chaotic mixture of all emotions at once. But now chaos was infecting it, like a virus entering a pristine system. The ruinous powers were learning this new dimensions, rules, adapting, spreading. The calm order of this galaxy's psychic realm was being corrupted, introducing new variables, new possibilities for manifestation. "We can't hold here," Mace Windu said, his lightsaber moving in precise Form 7 arcs that destroyed demon after demon. "There are too many, and more are coming. We need to seal these rifts at their source." The sword of Macridge, Artemius realized with dawning horror. "We brought our Geller field generators into this galaxy. They're designed to hold back the warp, to create bubbles of real space stability. But if the field has degraded since our arrival, if the boundary between your force and our warp has destabilized, then your ship is the anchor point," Obi-Wan finished. "The hole through which these things are pouring into our reality. We need to get to the Jedi Temple hangar." Now, they fought their way back through the Senate building, leaving behind a trail of dissolving demonic corpses and psychically traumatized staff members. The clone troopers who encountered the demons fought bravely, their training and discipline serving them well. But they lacked the faith-based protection of the Space Marines or the Force attunement of the Jedi. Artemius watched 3 troopers die as a horror's touch corrupted their minds, driving them to turn their blasters on each other. "This is what the Imperium fights," Thalios said to Mace as they ran. "Every day, on 1,000 worlds. This is why we have no tolerance for corruption, why we execute heretics without trial. Because once chaos gains a foothold, it spreads like a plague. And the only cure is fire. There has to be another way," Mace insisted, though his voice carried less certainty than before. Watching clone troopers, good men he'd fought beside for years, succumb to corruption in seconds, had shaken his faith in rehabilitation and redemption. "If you find one," Thalios replied, "the Imperium would rejoice to learn it. But in 40,000 years, we have found only one solution that works. Purge the tainted, burn the corrupted, never give chaos a moment to breathe." They reached the temple hangar to find it already under assault. Pink and blue horrors swarmed across the landing platforms, attacking parked Jedi starfighters and clone LAT gunships. Padawans and younglings were being evacuated by night-level Jedi, their faces pale with terror as they witnessed horrors their training had never prepared them for. And at the center of it all, the sword of Macridge sat like a Gothic cathedral, its architecture seeming to pulse with unholy life. Around the ship, reality was visibly fragmenting. The air shimmered, colors bled into each other, and through the cracks, more entities pressed, hungry for entry into this pristine galaxy. "Brother Vastian," Artemius commanded, "I need you to reach the ship, stabilize the Geller field, purge any demonic corruption from the systems. Can you do it?" The Techmarine's answer was to sprint toward the vessel, his servo-arm crackling with power, tools as he muttered machine prayers to the Omnicia. Octavian and his squad formed a protective corridor, their bolters creating a wall of explosive death through which no demon could pass. But as Vastian reached the boarding ramp, something else emerged from the ship, something that made even the Ultramarine step back in shock. It wore the armor of a Space Marine, but corrupted, twisted. The blue ceramite had turned to pulsing flesh, the Ultima symbol bleeding into an 8-pointed star. The helm was fused to the skull beneath, and through the eye lenses, madness stared out at the world. "Brother Sergeant Marcellus," Artemius breathed, recognizing the armor's identification runes. "He was aboard the Sword of Macridge. He was with us when we translated." "Was," Chaplain Thalios corrected grimly. No longer. The warp took him during our passage. And now chaos has gifted us with his corpse. The thing that had been Marcellus laughed, a sound that cracked like breaking glass and dripped with madness. Brothers, it called, its voice layered with whispers. Why do you resist? Can't you feel it? This new galaxy, untouched by the long war, pristine and ripe for change? Sench has shown me such wonders. And he would show you too, if only you would open your eyes to possibility. Traitor, Artemius said flatly, raising his bolt pistol. You abandoned your oaths, betrayed the Emperor. There is only one fate for such treachery. The Emperor is dead, Marcellus Thing hissed. Or as good as 10,000 years on that throne, rotting while he claims to protect us. But here, in this galaxy, the powers are different. The rules are different. And I have seen what we could become if we embraced the Force and the warp together. Power beyond imagining, brother. We could be gods. We were made to serve a god, Thalios replied, his voice hard as adamantium. Not to become one. Your corruption ends now. The battle that followed was brief and brutal. The chaos corrupted. Marine fought with the strength of 8 men and the backing of Tsientian sorcery, hurling warp fire that made reality scream. But he faced not just ultramarines, but Jedi as well. Lightsabers carved through demonic flesh. Force powers redirected sorceress blasts. And when Artemius's power fist finally connected with the traitor's chest, the ceramite cracked, the corruption burned, and Marcellus's spirit was banished back to the warp. With a shriek of rage and despair. One of your own, Anakin said quietly, staring at the dissolving corpse. How do you just kill him like that? Without hesitation. Because hesitation would have killed us all, Artemius replied. This is the choice the Imperium faces every day, Knight Skywalker. Brothers who fall, friends who betray, family who must be purged. If you cannot make that choice, chaos is already won. Vastian reached the ship's systems and began his work. His mechadendrites interfacing with the Geller field generators. Slowly, agonizingly slowly, the field began to stabilize. The rifts in reality started to close. The demons, cut off from their warp anchor, began to dissolve. But in the moment before the last rift sealed, something looked through. Something vast. Something that existed beyond the division of light and dark, of order and chaos. An intelligence that saw the Republic, the Jedi, the endless potential of this new galaxy, and smiled. Chancellor Palpatine, watching the battle through security feeds in his office, felt that gaze and smiled back. Finally, he thought. Finally, a power worthy of his ambition. The Jedi Council convened an emergency session at dawn. Though dawn on Coruscant was merely a designation, the planet city's lights never truly dimmed. Through the council chamber's windows, the endless streams of traffic continued their eternal dance, oblivious to the fact that reality itself had nearly torn apart the previous night. 47 dead, 132 corrupted beyond recovery, now sedated in medical facilities under heavy guard, 3 sectors of the Senate building quarantined, and 1 fallen space marine, his gene seed destroyed to prevent any taint from spreading. Master Yoda sat with his eyes closed, his connection to the Force stretched, thin as he tried to sense any lingering corruption. What he found disturbed him more than the attack itself: echoes, resonances, as if the Force had been exposed to something foreign, and part of it had changed, adapted, learned, new harmonics that shouldn't exist. Contained, the immediate threat is, Yoda said finally, opening his eyes to survey the assembled masters. But ended it has not. A wound in the Force this incident created. Healing, it will take time. Perhaps much time. The question, Mace Windu said, his voice carrying the weight of sleepless hours spent coordinating the temple's defense, is what we do about our guests. He gestured to where the Ultramarines stood: Artemius, Thalios, Octavian, and Helix. Vastian remained aboard the Sword of Macridge, working to ensure no further demonic corruption lurked in the ship's systems. They warned us this could happen. They fought beside us without hesitation. But they also brought this chaos to our galaxy. We did not intend such an outcome, Artemius said, his voice carrying a rare note of something that might have been regret. The warp follows Imperial vessels everywhere. We thought, hoped, that your galaxy's different nature would reject such corruption. Clearly, we were wrong. Wrong. Kiadimundi's voice held barely suppressed anger. 47 beings are dead, Captain. Beings who had never heard of your emperor, your chaos, your eternal war. They died because you brought something evil into our galaxy without adequate preparation or warning. And hundreds more would have died if we hadn't been here to fight it. Chaplain Thalios countered. Your Jedi had no idea what they faced. Your lightsabers were effective, yes. But your doctrine, your reluctance to kill, your belief in redemption would have gotten you slaughtered within hours. If the corruption had spread, we saved lives, Master Kiadimundi, even as we endangered them. A convenient justification, Shakti observed coolly. You bring the disease and then claim credit for providing the cure. How very imperial of you. The tension in the chamber was thick enough to cut with a lightsaber. The Jedi had seen what chaos could do, had felt its corrupting touch on the Force itself, and now they faced beings whose entire civilization was built around fighting that corruption, but whose methods were so brutal, so absolute, that they seemed almost as dangerous as the threat they opposed. Perhaps, Obi-Wan Kenobi said carefully, we should focus on practical matters. Captain Artemius, you said your ship created what did you call it? The anchor point for these entities. The Geller field degradation, yes, Artemius confirmed. When we translated from the warp into your galaxy, the field was strained beyond normal parameters. It created microfractures in the barrier between dimensions. Normally, these would seal naturally as the ship remained in real space. But your force, your galaxy's unique psychic emanations, they interfered with that process. The fractures remained open, grew larger, and through them, lesser demons followed. Can you seal them permanently? Mace asked. Brother Vastian is attempting to do so now. But the fundamental problem remains, as long as the sword of Macrogeek exists in your galaxy. It represents a potential weak point, a door between the warp and real space that could be exploited. Then perhaps, Plo Koon suggested, his breathing mask hissing softly, your ship should leave our galaxy. Return to your Imperium through whatever method brought you here. We would, Apothecary Helix said, his voice clinical, if we knew how. Our navigator died during the translation. The warp currents here are unlike anything in Imperial charts. We are stranded, masters, and if we attempt blind translation, we risk tearing an even larger hole between dimensions. The catastrophe you witnessed would be merely the opening act. The council fell silent, contemplating the implications. The Ultramarines couldn't leave, but their presence endangered the Republic. It was an impossible situation, and impossible situations were precisely when the Jedi Order was meant to find the middle path. There may be another option, a voice said from the chamber's entrance. Every head turned. Chancellor Palpatine stood in the doorway, flanked by Senate guards and looking every inch the concerned leader. But those who were Force-sensitive felt something off about his presence. A void. A blank space where emotions should be. Chancellor, Mace said with barely concealed frustration. This is a closed council session. We agreed that the Jedi would handle the crisis. Palpatine interrupted smoothly. Yes, I agreed to give you time, Master Windu. But time has run out. The Senate is demanding answers. They want to know why beings are dying from an invisible plague, why sectors of the Senate building are quarantined, why there are rumors of monsters in the lower levels. He paused, his gaze sweeping across the Ultramarines with what appeared to be genuine curiosity. They want to know if these visitors from beyond are our salvation or our doom. They are neither, Yoda said firmly. Strangers in a strange land, they are, bearing warnings of dangers we did not know existed. Judge them too quickly, we should not. With respect, Grand Master, the Senate doesn't have the luxury of Jedi patience, Palpatine replied. However, I come not to condemn, but to offer a solution. The Republic has faced existential threats before, the Mandalorian Wars, the Great Hyperspace War, the Sith conflicts. Each time, we survived by adapting, by learning from those who had faced similar dangers. He turned to Artemius. Captain, your Imperium has fought this chaos for 40,000 years. You have doctrines, procedures, technologies designed to detect and combat such corruption. The Republic needs that knowledge. In exchange, we can offer our resources to help you find a way home. It was a reasonable proposal. Too reasonable. Artemius's enhanced senses detected the manipulation. Beneath the grandfatherly tone, the way Palpatine's words were carefully constructed to appeal to both Jedi idealism and ultramarine pragmatism. Simultaneously, what exactly are you proposing, Chancellor? Artemius asked carefully. A partnership, a cultural exchange, if you will. Your Space Marines would work with Jedi Knights to establish protocols for detecting and combating demonic corruption. Your Tech Marines would share knowledge with our scientists about this warp and how it relates to the Force. Your chaplains would explain the psychological defenses your people have developed. Palpatine smiled. And in return, our best minds, Jedi, Republic scientists, even some military strategists, would study your ship, your technology, your methods of warp travel. Together, we might find a way to send you home while protecting the Republic from future incursions. You would have us teach your people the Imperial Creed? Thalios said, his voice skeptical. Share sacred rites and holy doctrine with those who worship no gods, who embrace the very freedom that allows corruption to take root. I would have you save lives, chaplain, Palpatine replied. Isn't that what your emperor would want? For his warriors to protect humanity wherever they find it. The words were a trap, and Artemius knew it. Accept, and they would be legitimizing the Republic's democracy, teaching anti-chaos doctrine to force-wielding potential heretics. Refuse, and they would abandon innocence to demonic corruption, a dereliction of duty that would shame the Ultramarines chapter for generations. The Chancellor makes a compelling argument, Obi-Wan said, though his voice carried uncertainty. We cannot simply ignore what we've learned. Chaos is real. The threat it poses is undeniable. We need to understand it if we're to protect the Republic. Understanding leads to curiosity, Thalios warned. Curiosity leads to experimentation, and experimentation with chaos leads to damnation. This is not knowledge meant for those without faith in the Emperor's protection. But we have the Force, Anakin interjected. He'd been standing quietly in the corner, observing the debate, but now stepped forward with the intensity that marked all his interventions. If the Force and the warp are related, if they're different aspects of the same fundamental power, then maybe we can fight chaos using the light side. Maybe that's why we're Force-sensitive, to defend against exactly this kind of corruption. Or, Thalios countered, your Force sensitivity makes you uniquely vulnerable. Psychers in the Imperium must undergo rigorous testing and soul binding before they're allowed to use their powers. Those who fail are executed or sacrificed to maintain the Astronomicon. You Jedi wield psychic power with no such safeguards, trusting only in your own discipline and training. From an Imperial perspective, you are all unsanctioned psychers, all potential gates for demonic incursion. That's not, Anakin began hotly. Enough, Yoda interrupted, his staff striking the floor with surprising force. Debate theology later, we can. Address the immediate crisis, we must. He turned his ancient gaze on Artemius. Trust you, I do not. But trust your hatred of this chaos, I do. Work together, we must. For a time. Until contained, the threat is. Agreed, Artemius considered. Every instinct screamed that this was wrong, that teaching the Imperial Creed to heretics, that legitimizing their democracy and their force-wielding, would disgrace his chapter. But another part of him, the part that remembered why the Emperor had created the Space Marines in the first place, recognized the duty before him. Agreed, he said finally, but under strict conditions. We teach only what is necessary for immediate defense. No sharing of sacred rites beyond what is required. No technological exchange beyond what aids in our eventual departure. And if we detect true corruption, not potential, but actual demonic taint, we reserve the right to purge it, according to our doctrines, regardless of Republic law. Unacceptable, Ki-Adi-Mundi said immediately. You cannot have authority to execute Republic citizens without trial, without oversight. That would make you judge, jury, and executioner. That is precisely what we are, Thalios replied. It is what we were created to be. The Emperor's angels of death do not answer to civilian authority. We answer only to the throne and to our chapter. In your Imperium, perhaps, Mace said, his voice hard. But here, you are guests. Powerful guests, yes. Dangerous guests, absolutely. But still guests. You will respect our laws, or you will be confined to your ship under guard. The threat hung in the air. The Ultramarines could fight their way out. Artemius had no doubt about that. 5 Space Marines could probably devastate the temple before being overwhelmed by sheer numbers. But it would be a pointless slaughter that would doom any chance of cooperation. A compromise, Chancellor Palpatine suggested smoothly. The Space Marines maintain authority over any clearly demonic threats, entities, like those we faced yesterday, but any actions against Republic citizens suspected of corruption must be approved by both Jedi Council and Senate oversight. No executions without due process, unless the target is actively manifesting supernatural corruption. It was a politician's solution, satisfying no one fully, but giving everyone enough to save face. Artemius hated it on principle, but pragmatism, as Gilliman's Codex taught, sometimes required accepting imperfect solutions. Agreed, he said finally. But if we encounter a Chaos Marine, a confirmed cultist, or an active demonic possession, that is ours to handle. No deliberation, no debate, immediate sanction. Agreed, Yoda said before anyone could object. Trust in the Force, we do. But trust also in your experience, we must. Protect the Republic together, we shall. As the council session concluded with formal agreements to be drafted, Palpatine watched with satisfaction. The pieces were falling into place beautifully. The Jedi would learn about chaos, would study it, categorize it, try to understand it through their Force-based philosophy. And in doing so, they would make themselves vulnerable in ways they couldn't imagine. Because Darth Sidious already understood what the Jedi and the Ultramarines had not yet realized. Chaos and the dark side were not separate phenomena. They were convergent evolution, 2 galaxies, developing similar psychic parasites in response to sentient emotion. And now, with both systems interacting, with the warp bleeding into the Force, the possibilities were endless. He could feel it already, the dark side growing stronger, feeding on the fear and uncertainty the demonic attack had generated. The Jedi sensed it too, though they attributed it to stress and trauma. They didn't realize that every moment of doubt, every flash of anger at the Ultramarines' brutal methods, every fear that perhaps the Space Marines were right about the necessity of authoritarian control, all of it fed the darkness. And soon, very soon, Order 66 would activate. The clone troopers, already susceptible to behavioral modification through their inhibitor chips, would turn on their Jedi generals. But now, with chaos loose in the galaxy, with the dark side growing fat on fresh fear, the purge would be just the beginning. In the temple's meditation chambers, Anakin Skywalker sat in uneasy contemplation. The previous night had shaken him more than he cared to admit. He'd seen the thing that had been. Brother Sergeant Marcellus, seen a warrior, corrupted beyond redemption, transformed into something monstrous. And he'd watched Artemius kill his own brother without hesitation, without grief, without anything but cold necessity. Could he do that? If Obi-Wan fell to darkness, if Padme was corrupted, if Ahsoka became something twisted, could he strike them down without hesitation? The Jedi Code said to have no attachments, to be ready to let go. But the Ultramarines went further. They didn't just let go. They purged. They destroyed what they loved if it became tainted. Was that strength? Or the ultimate corruption, becoming so hard, so absolute, that you lost the very humanity you claimed to protect? He didn't know. And that uncertainty terrified him more than any demon. Across the city, in the industrial sectors where sunlight never reached, something stirred in the shadows. The demons had been banished, yes. The rifts had been sealed. But corruption never truly disappeared. It merely waited, adapted, learned. And in the darkness, a worker, a simple maintenance technician named Garth, who had witnessed the demon attack, from a safe distance, felt a new thought enter his mind. A thought that wasn't quite his own, but seemed so reasonable, so obvious, that he couldn't understand why he hadn't thought of it before. The Jedi were afraid. The Senate was vulnerable. And these Space Marines, with their talk of gods and faith, perhaps, Garth thought, perhaps there was power in that faith. Perhaps if he just opened his mind, let himself believe in something greater. In the warp, Cinch smiled. The architect of fate had found his first true cultist in this pristine galaxy, the first of millions to come. The game, as the Changer of Ways liked to say, had only just begun. 3 weeks after the Senate incident, An uneasy equilibrium had formed across Coruscant. The Ultramarines worked in shifts, some training with Jedi Knights in the temple's combat halls, others consulting with Republic scientists about warp-based phenomena, still others maintaining vigil aboard the Sword of Macridge while Brother Vastian attempted to navigate the ship's corrupted systems back to functionality. The cultural exchange, as Chancellor Palpatine had termed it, was proving more volatile than anyone anticipated. In the temple's archives, Jocasta Nu, the elderly Jedi librarian, stood before a holographic display with Chaplain Thalios, their discussion growing increasingly heated. Around them, shelves containing millennia of Jedi knowledge stretched into the shadows. But neither scholar paid attention to the surroundings. They were too focused on their theological dispute. "You speak of faith as if it were a shield," Jocasta said, her voice carrying the patience of one who had taught thousands of students over her long life. But faith without understanding is merely superstition. The Jedi seek knowledge precisely because blind belief can be manipulated, corrupted by those who would use it for their own ends. And knowledge without faith is arrogance, Thalios countered, his skull helm resting on a nearby table so she could see his scarred, severe face. "You believe you can understand the universe through study and meditation. But some truths cannot be comprehended, Madame Nu. They can only be accepted. The Emperor's divinity is not a hypothesis. To be tested, it is a fundamental reality upon which all imperial doctrine rests. But if your Emperor forbade worship, as you yourself admitted, then how can his divinity be fundamental? It sounds more like a convenient fiction your Imperium adopted after his incapacitation." She gestured to a holographic display showing corrupted texts recovered from the Senate attack. "These symbols, these words your demons spoke, they follow linguistic patterns, mathematical structures. They can be analyzed, understood, potentially countered through knowledge rather than blind faith. Those symbols," Thalios said, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper, "are the dark tongue of chaos. Every character you study invites corruption. Every pattern you analyze opens a door in your mind. This is not academic research, Madame Nu. This is spiritual warfare, and you are walking into battle unarmed." Before Jocasta could respond, the archive's lights flickered. Both turned as a section of holographic records glitched, displaying images that shouldn't exist in the Jedi database. 8-pointed stars, demonic sigils, fragments of corrupted Gothic text that seemed to writhe as they appeared. "Impossible," Jocasta breathed. "These archives are isolated from the holonet. Nothing can infiltrate. Chaos requires no network connection," Thalios said grimly, already moving toward the contaminated systems. "It spreads through thought, through observation, through the very act of studying it." He pulled a device from his armor, an Imperial sensor, designed to detect warp corruption. The device shrieked with alarm. "The archives are tainted. How many have accessed these files?" "Dozens," Jocasta admitted, her face paling. "I distributed copies to various Jedi scholars for study. You thought knowledge was safe. That understanding would protect you." Thalios's voice held no anger, only grim certainty. "This is how chaos spreads, Madame Nu. Not through obvious corruption, but through curiosity, through the belief that you are strong enough, wise enough, disciplined enough to study darkness, without being touched by it." He activated his Vox. "Brother Captain, we have a situation in the archives. Memetic contamination, multiple exposures. Request immediate quarantine protocols." "Denied," Artemius's voice crackled back. "We cannot enforce Imperial quarantine without Council approval. The agreement. The agreement will get people killed." Thalios snapped. "Every moment we delay, the corruption spreads. Then we follow Republic procedure," Artemius replied, though frustration bled through his controlled tone. "Alert the Council. Request voluntary isolation of exposed individuals. Explain the threat. Let them make the choice." Thalios wanted to argue, but he knew Artemius was right. They were guests here, bound by agreements made in good faith. Even if those agreements were, from an Imperial perspective, suicidally naive. In the Council chamber, the debate that followed was predictable and infuriating in equal measure. "You're asking us to isolate 47 Jedi scholars," Mace Windu said, his expression caught between concern and skepticism. based on their exposure to symbols in a database. Not because they've shown any signs of corruption, but because they might, theoretically, become corrupted at some future point. Yes, Thalios said flatly. That is exactly what I'm asking. Because by the time symptoms appear, it will be too late. Chaos corruption is not a disease that manifests with convenient warning signs. It is spiritual cancer. By the time you detect it, metastasis has already occurred. But we've examined these scholars through the force, Shakti protested. We sense no darkness in them, no hint of the corruption you describe. Because your force cannot detect chaos in its dormant stage. Apothecary Helix explained, his clinical tone somehow making the situation more disturbing. Chaos operates on wavelengths your force sensitivity doesn't naturally perceive. It's like, imagine a sound pitched too high for your species' hearing range. Just because you can't hear it doesn't mean it isn't there, slowly damaging your auditory system. Then how do you detect it? Obi-Wan asked reasonably. If our force sensitivity is inadequate, what method do you use? Faith, Thalios said simply. Prayer. Devotion to the Emperor provides a psychic resonance that chaos cannot perfectly mimic. Those truly faithful can sense the wrongness, the hollow places where corruption has taken root. But you, he gestured to the assembled Jedi. You have no such faith. You rely on your force connection, which chaos is learning to subvert. You are blind, masters, and you refuse to acknowledge it. Or, Mundi suggested, his tone acidic. Your methods are so steeped in superstition that you see corruption where none exists. Tell me, chaplain, how many innocents has your Imperium executed based on these faith-based detections? How many were killed not because they were truly corrupted, but because they failed to demonstrate sufficient zealotry? Thalios's hand moved to his Crozius Arcanum. Around the chamber, Jedi shifted nervously. Artemius placed a restraining hand on his chaplain's shoulder. Thousands, Artemius said quietly. Tens of thousands, over our history. Perhaps more. And yes, some were likely innocent. Some were probably killed because they questioned doctrine, or failed to show adequate piety, or simply were in the wrong place when an inquisitor decided to make an example. He met Mundi's gaze steadily. But do you know how many billions would have died if we had shown mercy? If we had given corruption time to spread, time to metastasize, time to damn entire worlds? The Imperium's brutality is its strength, Master. Its absolute certainty is what has kept humanity alive for 40 millennia. You may find our methods barbaric, but they work. At what cost? Yoda asked softly. Your souls, perhaps? Your humanity? Become monsters to fight monsters, and monsters you remain. Even if victory you achieve. Then we are monsters, Thalios said. Monsters who serve the Emperor's will. Monsters who have kept the species alive through the long night. If that is what survival requires, then we embrace it without shame. The chamber fell silent. The philosophical chasm between Jedi and Ultramarines seemed unbridgeable, one side believing in redemption and trust, the other in purging and eternal vigilance. Neither could fully accept the other's worldview without abandoning their fundamental principles. Compromise. Palpatine's voice came from the chamber's comm system. He wasn't present physically, but his political influence required consultation. The scholars will undergo intensive force meditation, supervised by council masters. If any show signs of corruption, by either Jedi or Ultramarine standards, they will be isolated immediately. But we will not imprison beings for thought crimes. Not in the Republic. It was the best outcome Artemius could have hoped for, and he knew it. Agreed. But I want Chaplain Thalios present during these meditations. He will sense what your force cannot. Acceptable, Mace said after a moment's consideration. But understand, Chaplain, you are an observer. You do not have authority to detain or harm any Jedi. Unless the Council agrees they pose an immediate threat, then pray to your force. Thalios said grimly. That we never find out who is right. The meditation sessions began that afternoon in the temple's deepest sanctum, a chamber designed for confronting darkness, where Jedi had historically faced their fears and overcome them through force-guided insight. 47 scholars sat in concentric circles, their minds open to the Force, while 6 council masters monitored their spiritual states. And standing in the shadows, Chaplain Thalios watched with his sensor active, waiting for the inevitable. It took 3 hours. A Rodian scholar named Tycho was the first to break. His meditation grew agitated, his breathing erratic. Through the Force, the Jedi sensed something. Not darkness exactly, but wrongness. A discordance in his connection to the living energy that bound all things. Tycho, Shakti said gently, moving to kneel beside him. What do you sense? What troubles you? Patterns, Tycho whispered, his large eyes glazed. I see patterns in the symbols. Mathematical structures that describe reality's substrate. The Force isn't random. Master T. It's ordered, structured. And if you understand the structure, you can rewrite it, change it, make the universe obey your will rather than flow with it. That is the dark side speaking, Shakti said, though uncertainty crept into her voice. The dark side offers power through domination and control, but that path leads only to, not dark side, Tycho interrupted, his voice taking on harmonics that shouldn't come from a Rodian throat. Not light side, beyond side. There is a power that predates your Force, masters. A power that exists in the spaces between thoughts. And it has such gifts to offer those wise enough to accept them. Thalios moved with shocking speed for something so large. His Crozius Arcanum activated, its power field crackling to life. Step away from him, Master T. That is no longer your scholar. You don't know that, Shakti said. But she moved back instinctively, her hand dropping to her lightsaber. Tycho, listen to me. You've been exposed to something foreign. Something that's trying to manipulate your thoughts. But you're stronger than this. Center yourself. Return to the Force. Tycho's head swiveled with unnatural fluidity. When he smiled, his teeth seemed too numerous, too sharp. The Force is just chaos wearing a pleasant mask. You simply haven't realized it yet. But you will. When the clone army turns on you. When your precious Republic burns. When the Dark Lord reveals himself and reshapes this galaxy according to his vision. You will understand that order and chaos are illusions. There is only power, and the will to use it. Dark Lord, Mace Windu stepped forward, his expression intense. What Dark Lord? Explain yourself. But Tycho was laughing now, the sound wrong on too many levels to catalog. His form began to shimmer, reality bending around him as something tried to manifest. Not a full demon. The Force's natural order resisted such complete corruption. But enough. Enough to show teeth and claws and eyes that looked into places beings weren't meant to see. No, Thalios said simply, and his Crozius Arcanum came down. The power field disrupted the partial manifestation, banishing the demonic presence with a shriek that existed on psychic frequencies rather than auditory ones. Tycho collapsed, his body unmarked, but his spirit broken, shattered. The thing that had been trying to possess him had burned out his mind when forced to retreat. You killed him, Shakti breathed, horror in her voice. I saved him, Thalios corrected, deactivating his weapon. What remained of his soul, at least? If I had hesitated, if I had waited for your council's deliberation, full possession would have occurred, and then you would have had to choose between killing your corrupted scholar or allowing him to spread corruption further. I made the choice for you, as I said I would. You had no right. Mace began. I had every right. Thalios roared, his voice filling the chamber with righteous fury. You gave me authority over demonic threats. That was a demonic possession in progress. I acted within the parameters of our agreement. And if you dispute this, if you choose to punish me for saving lives, then you prove everything I have said about your Republic's suicidal naivety. The standoff lasted for endless seconds. Then Yoda, his ancient face grave, tapped his staff against the floor. Right he was. Wrong we were. Underestimated the threat, we did. Believed our Force would protect us. He looked at the remaining scholars, most of whom were staring at Tycho's unconscious form with horror. Assume safety, we cannot. Trust only in the Force, we cannot. Learn from these warriors, we must. However bitter that lesson may be. The meditation session ended in failure and recrimination. Of the 47 scholars, 12 showed subtle signs of corruption, nothing as advanced as Tycho, but enough that Thalios insisted on immediate isolation. The council reluctantly agreed, though the political fallout would be severe. As the Jedi dispersed, Obi-Wan found himself walking alongside Brother Captain Artemius through the temple's corridors. For a long time, neither spoke. Finally, Obi-Wan broke the silence. You're changing us, he said quietly. Your presence here, your methods, your doctrine, it's making the Jedi question everything we believe, making us harder, more suspicious, less willing to trust in redemption. Good, Artemius replied. Because that softness, that faith in universal redemption, that belief that all beings have good within them, it will get you killed when the true darkness comes. And make no mistake, Master Kenobi, the darkness is coming. Chaos has found your galaxy now. It will not leave willingly. But if we become like you, Obi-Wan pressed, if we adopt your paranoia and your brutality, don't we lose what makes us Jedi? What makes us worth defending? Artemius stopped, turning to face the Jedi Master. When the Horus heresy began, the Loyalist legions asked the same question. If we become as brutal as the traitors, what makes us different? Do you know what answer we found? He paused. Purpose. The traitors killed for power, for ambition, for the whispers of chaos. We killed to preserve humanity's future. Same actions, different intentions. And in the end, intention is all that separates righteousness from damnation. A fine distinction, Obi-Wan observed. The finest, Artemius agreed. And the one you will have to master if you hope to survive what's coming. In his Senate office, Palpatine reviewed reports of the temple incident with satisfaction. The Jedi were fracturing, their philosophical unity eroding under the weight of pragmatic necessity. Some, like Shakti, clung to traditional compassion. Others, like Mace Windu, were beginning to see the merit in harsher measures. And a few, like Anakin Skywalker, the young knight, was particularly promising. Palpatine had sensed his fascination with the Ultramarines' absolute certainty, their rejection of the Jedi's endless deliberation. Skywalker wanted action, wanted results, wanted the power to protect those he loved without the Council's restrictions holding him back. Soon, Palpatine thought, soon he would make his offer. And when Anakin fell, when the Chosen One became Darth Vader, he would fall not just to the dark side, but to something new, something that combined Sith philosophy with Chaos's corrupting influence. A Sith-Chaos hybrid, the ultimate corruption. The galaxy would burn beautifully. The Clone Wars had raged for 3 years across the galaxy, but Coruscant had remained largely untouched, a symbol of republic, strength and stability. That illusion shattered when General Grievous' fleet emerged from hyperspace above the capital world, backed by separatist dreadnoughts that blackened the sky. The attack came without warning, without the usual intelligence leaks that characterized most separatist operations. It was as if someone had deliberately blinded the Republic's security networks, ensuring maximum surprise and chaos. In the Temple's command center, Jedi Masters coordinated defensive operations, while clone troopers mobilized across the city planet, and standing alongside them, the Ultramarines prepared for their first true battle in this new galaxy, not against demons or corrupted scholars, but against a conventional military force. Their tactics are unsound, Brother Sergeant Octavian observed, studying the holographic display of separatist fleet movements. They've committed their capital ships too early, without adequate fighter screening. Their battle droids advance in rigid formations that any competent commander could exploit. This General Grievous, he fights without understanding combined arms doctrine. He fights without understanding fear. Obi-Wan corrected, standing beside the Space Marine. Grievous is a cyborg, organic brain in a droid body. He doesn't need to breathe, doesn't tire, doesn't hesitate. And he's killed dozens of Jedi in personal combat. Don't underestimate him. A Xenos, then, Chaplain Thalios said, the contempt clear in his voice. Or near enough. The Imperium's doctrine for such abominations is clear, complete extermination. No negotiation. No quarter. He's not a Xenos, Anakin interjected, entering the command center with Ahsoka at his side. The young knight looked energized, almost eager, at the prospect of battle. He was Kalish once, fully organic. He chose to become what he is, made himself into a weapon. Which makes him worse, Thalios replied. Xenos are what they are by nature, but a being who voluntarily abandons their humanity, who transforms themselves into an abomination, that is corruption of the deepest kind, that is choosing damnation. Can we perhaps focus on the actual battle? Mace Windu said sharply, his patience clearly worn thin by weeks of theological disputes. Grievous' fleet is targeting the Senate district. If they land troops there, an explosion rocked the temple. Alarms shrieked as proximity sensors detected. Separatist landing craft breaching the defensive perimeter. Through the windows, they could see vulture droids strafing. Clone positions while massive. Separatist transports descended toward the city's surface. They're landing everywhere, a clone commander reported, his voice tight with stress. Senate, commercial sectors, industrial zones. It's not a focused assault. They're trying to spread our forces thin. Classic Tyrannid swarm tactics, Apothecary Helix observed. Overwhelm through sheer numbers and force the enemy to divide their strength responding to multiple threats. Crude, but effective against unprepared defenders. We're not unprepared, Mace said, though his expression suggested otherwise. The Republic military had been designed for peacekeeping, not total war. 3 years of conflict had taught them much. But this scale of assault on the capital itself was unprecedented. Then you need a rapid response force, Artemius said, decision crystallizing in his enhanced mind. Something that can deploy to the most critical threats and eliminate them before the defensive line collapses. Completely. He turned to his brothers. Octavian, take your squad. Support the Senate District Defense. Helix, coordinate medical response. Your Imperial combat triage protocols will save lives our hosts' doctors would lose. Thalios, with me. We're going after Grievous. Brother Captain. Vastian's voice crackled over the vox from the Sword of Macridge. I have successfully restored primary systems. The ship is combat capable. Do you require orbital support? Artemius considered. The Sword of Macridge's weapons could turn the tide of the battle in minutes. Lance batteries that could vaporize capital ships. Torpedo tubes loaded with cyclonic warheads. Bombardment cannons designed to level cities. But using them would reveal the Imperium's full military capacity to the Republic, and more importantly, to whatever other forces were watching this conflict. Negative, he said finally. Maintain defensive posture. If separatist forces approach our position, you are authorized to engage. But do not initiate offensive operations without my direct order. Understood, Brother Captain. The Emperor protects. The Emperor protects, Artemius echoed, then turned to Mace. We're moving out. Where is Grievous most likely to strike? The Jedi Temple, Obi-Wan said grimly. He collects lightsabers from fallen Jedi. An attack on Coruscant. On the temple itself, he won't be able to resist. As if summoned by the prediction, another proximity alarm sounded. This time, the holographic display showed a single ship, smaller than the transports. More maneuverable. It was heading directly for the temple's upper spires with suicidal determination. He's coming, Mace said, igniting his lightsaber. Around the command center, other Jedi did the same. All masters and knights, defensive positions. Padawans and younglings to the evacuation shelters. This is not a drill. Artemius and Thalios moved toward the temple's landing platforms. Their bolters loaded with armor-piercing rounds. They emerged into chaos. The Coruscant sky filled with fighters dogfighting. At supersonic speeds, tracers and laser fire creating deadly light shows across the city. And descending toward them, a ship that bristled with weapons and radiated malevolent purpose. The ship didn't land so much as crash, its hull scraping across the platform and sending sparks flying. The boarding ramp dropped, and from within strode a nightmare of metal and organic tissue. General, Grievous was taller than expected, over 7 feet of durasteel and cortosis plating, with 4 arms ending in clawed hands. His eyes burned yellow in a skull-like faceplate, and his movements combined mechanical precision with organic fluidity in ways that shouldn't be possible. Behind him marched ranks of battle droids, their blasters raised. Jedi, Grievous rasped, his voice like metal scraping stone. How delightful. I haven't added to my collection in weeks. Then, his eyes fixed on the Ultramarines, and something like curiosity entered his tone. And what are these? New Republic soldiers? How interesting. We are the Emperor's Space Marines, Thalios said, his Crozius Arcanum crackling to life. Angels of death. And you, Abomination, are an affront to the human form. Your existence ends today. Grievous laughed, a horrible, mechanical sound. Human? I left humanity behind long ago. Weakness. Frailty. Mortality. I discarded them all to become perfect. And now I will discard you. He moved with shocking speed, his four arms drawing lightsabers, trophies from fallen Jedi, and igniting them in a spinning display of deadly grace. The Ultramarines opened fire, their bolters roaring. But Grievous' cybernetic reflexes allowed him to deflect the mass-reactive rounds with his stolen blades, the bolts detonating harmlessly against the platform floor. Impressive weapons, Grievous observed, still advancing through the fusillade, but ultimately futile against superior reflexes, and Artemius's power fist caught him mid-sentence. The blow would have pulverized a tank. It sent Grievous flying across the platform, his chassis smoking where the disruptor field had overloaded his mechanical components. The cyborg crashed into his own battle droids, scattering them like toys. Superior reflexes, Artemius said flatly, mean nothing if you lack tactical awareness. You were so focused on deflecting ranged fire that you forgot about close combat. Amateur mistake. Grievous rose, his movements now jerky, damaged. But he was far from defeated. His organic brain, housed in its armored case, processed the new threat with cold efficiency. These warriors were not Jedi. They didn't rely on the Force, didn't follow predictable lightsaber forms. They were soldiers, brutal, pragmatic, and terrifyingly effective. Kill them, he commanded his droids. All of them. The battle droids opened fire with concentrated barges while Grievous himself retreated, his tactical programming, recognizing that direct confrontation with these new enemies would likely prove fatal. But as he moved, Jedi began arriving. Mace Windu, Obi-Wan Kenobi, Anakin Skywalker, and a dozen others, their lightsabers weaving defensive patterns against the droid fire. What followed was a masterclass in combined arms warfare. The Ultramarines provided overwhelming firepower, their bolters and flammers destroying droids by the dozen. The Jedi added mobility and precision, their force-enhanced movements allowing them to flank enemy positions and strike at vulnerable points. And together, they were devastating. Grievous found himself being driven back, his droid forces melting away under the onslaught. He'd fought Jedi before, understood their patterns, their limitations, their reluctance to kill even mechanical enemies. But these Space Marines had no such hesitation. They killed with industrial efficiency, treating the battle droids not as opponents, but as targets to be eliminated. This isn't over, Grievous snarled, activating his ship's automated defenses to cover his retreat. The Separatist Alliance will. The Separatist Alliance is a pawn, Thalios interrupted, his enhanced hearing picking up something in Grievous' tone. Something scripted. You were sent here to die, weren't you? This attack, it's not meant to succeed. It's meant to accomplish something else entirely. Grievous hesitated, and in that moment of uncertainty, Artemius understood. You're a distraction. While we're fighting you, the real threat is elsewhere. Where? What's the primary target? But Grievous was already moving, his damaged form scrambling back to his ship with desperate speed. The vessel's engines ignited, lifting off even as Republic fighters moved to intercept. And in the chaos of the retreat, no one noticed the single figure watching from the shadows, a hooded operative who had infiltrated the temple during the battle's confusion. Fall back to defensive positions, Mace commanded, watching Grievous' ship escape into the burning sky. Secure the temple. Tend to the wounded. This battle is not over, Yoda said, appearing at the platforms, edge with his diminutive form somehow radiating terrible certainty. A distraction, this was. Feel it in the Force, I do. Something terrible has happened. Something that will change everything. And across the city, in the Senate buildings underground, levels where the Republic's most dangerous prisoners were held, alarms began to scream. The facility housing Separatists were criminals, captured Sith artifacts, and other Republic secrets had been breached, not by droids or Separatist commandos, but by something else, something that moved through the shadows and left corrupted runes burned into the walls. The guard's body was found hours later, his mind broken, his final words scrawled in his own blood. The stars are right. The gods are waking, and the Republic will drown in the ashes of its own hubris. When Artemius examined the scene with Thalios, both Space Marines felt a chill that had nothing to do with temperature. The corruption signature here was massive, not the weak parasitic entities they'd fought before. but something more organized, more purposeful. A cult. Thalios said, his voice heavy with dread. Chaos has found true believers in your republic. Not accidental victims or corrupted scholars, but willing servants. People who have chosen to worship the ruinous powers. That's impossible, Mace protested, though his voice lacked conviction. No one would willingly serve the entities that killed Senator Karras and the others. No rational being would. Rationality has nothing to do with it. Artemius interrupted. Chaos offers power, purpose, a sense of meaning in a universe that often seems meaningless. For those who feel powerless, who believe the Republic has failed them, who see the clone wars dragging on without end, Chaos whispers promises of change, of revolution, of reshaping reality according to their will. He pulled up security footage from before the breach. A maintenance worker, the same one who'd witnessed the original demon attack weeks ago, had used stolen access codes to enter the facility. But his movements were wrong, too confident, too purposeful, and his eyes, when the camera caught them in close-up, reflected light in ways human eyes shouldn't. Full possession, Helix confirmed, his medical aspects analyzing the footage. Not a demon wearing a meat suit, but a human who has given himself over so completely to chaos that he and the entity have merged. This is what happens when corruption is allowed to progress unchecked. When people are not taught to recognize and resist the whispers. And what did he take? Obi-Wan asked, though he already suspected the answer. The inventory was damning. Sith holocrons containing ancient dark side knowledge, separatist biological weapons, and most disturbing, classified Republic research into force amplification, technology experiments that the Jedi Council had deemed too dangerous to continue but too important to destroy. He's building something, Artemius said, his enhanced mind processing the pattern. Or rather, the cult he serves is building something, combining your technology with chaos corruption, Sith knowledge with demonic power. This is how chaos adapts. It takes local systems and perverts them to its purposes. Then we hunt them down, Anakin said, his voice hard. He'd been unusually quiet during the battle, but now his intensity burned like a star. Find every cultist, every traitor, every being who's chosen to serve these things, and we end them permanently. Now you begin to understand, Thalios said, and there was something almost like approval in his tone. This is the choice every civilization eventually faces when confronting chaos. Do you hold to your ideals of redemption and due process? Or do you do what is necessary to survive, even if it damns your soul in the process? There has to be a middle path, Obi-Wan insisted. There's always a middle path. The Jedi way will get you killed, Artemius said flatly. I do not say this to be cruel, Master Kenobi. I say it because it is true. The Imperium tried the middle path once, in the days before the heresy. We believed in negotiation, in rehabilitation, in the fundamental goodness of humanity. And we were nearly destroyed. Learn from our mistakes, or repeat them. The choice is yours. In his Senate office, Palpatine felt the ripples through the Force, felt the Jedi Order fracturing under the weight of impossible choices, felt the dark side growing fat on fear and anger, felt the convergence of chaos and Sith power, creating something unprecedented in galactic history. And he smiled. Order 66 was scheduled to execute in 3 days. The clone troopers' inhibitor chips were primed. The Jedi would be slaughtered across 1,000 worlds, their peacekeeping presence erased in a single coordinated strike. And in the chaos that followed, with the Republic reeling and the Jedi dead, he would reshape the galaxy into his empire. But now, with chaos loose and spreading, with these Ultramarines demonstrating the power of absolute faith and brutal efficiency, with the dark side and the warp bleeding into each other, the empire he would create would be far greater than he'd originally envisioned. Not merely a Sith-ruled autocracy, but something darker, something that combined millennia of Sith knowledge with chaos's reality-warping power. He would become more than a Dark Lord. He would become a god. The galaxy would burn, and from its ashes, he would build paradise, a paradise of eternal order, where free will was the only heresy and his word was the only truth. All he needed was the right sacrifice, the right moment, the right confluence of force and warp. and he knew exactly where to find it. The Jedi Temple's lowest level, the section of shadows, had been sealed for centuries, a repository of dangerous knowledge and Sith artifacts too powerful to destroy but too corrupted to study openly. Only the Council Masters knew the access codes, and even they rarely ventured into its depths. Tonight, those seals meant nothing. Brother Captain Artemius felt it as soon as the assault began, a psychic scream that transcended normal sensation, bypassing his helm's sensory filters to claw directly at his consciousness. Beside him, Chaplain Thalios stumbled, his connection to the Emperor's divine will momentarily disrupted by whatever was happening below. Warp breach, Thalios gasped, his Crozius Arcanum igniting reflexively. Massive energy signature. Multiple entities manifesting. They're in the temple. They're inside the temple. Alarms shrieked through the corridors as Jedi across the massive structure felt the disturbance. Simultaneously, a wound in the Force so profound it made several masters cry out in pain. Master Yoda collapsed in his meditation chamber, ancient features twisted in agony, as he sensed something impossible occurring in the building's foundations. All knights converge on the lower levels. Mace Windu's voice boomed through the temple's communication system. This is not a drill. The section of shadows has been breached. Artemius and his ultramarines moved with practiced efficiency, their ceramite boots thundering through corridors as they descended. They passed Jedi running in the same direction, Anakin and Obi-Wan, Ahsoka and a dozen other knights, all converging on the breach point with weapons drawn and the Force coiling around them like armor. The temperature dropped as they descended, not gradually, but in sharp steps, each level deeper, bringing a bone-deep chill that had nothing to do with failing environmental systems. Frost formed on walls that had stood for millennia in climate-controlled comfort. And through the Force, the Jedi could sense it. Reality itself was fraying. The careful order of this galaxy being corrupted by something fundamentally wrong. They burst into the section of shadows to find carnage. The chamber was vast, its walls lined with sealed cases containing centuries of confiscated dark side artifacts. But many cases now stood empty, their contents stolen. And at the chamber's center, surrounded by corrupted symbols burned into the ancient floor, stood the cult. 20 figures in robes that seemed to absorb light. Their faces were hidden, but their presence radiated wrongness, the psychic stench of beings who had given themselves over completely to chaos. And floating above them, partially manifested through a rent in reality that pulsed with sickly light, was something that made even the Ultramarines pause. It was not a greater demon, thank the Emperor for small mercies, but it was no lesser horror either. This entity existed somewhere between full manifestation and pure psychic presence, its form shifting between states of matter in ways that hurt to observe. Where it touched reality, corruption spread, stone turning to flesh, air solidifying into crystalline structures, time itself stuttering and skipping like a damaged recording. A herald of Tsench, Thalios identified, his voice tight with controlled fear. Not a demon prince, not yet, but close. This is a servant of the Changer of Ways, who has been granted a fraction of their patron's power, and it's using your Sith artifacts to anchor itself in real space. Indeed, the cultists had arranged stolen holocrons in geometric patterns around the manifestation point, each device glowing with dark side energy that somehow resonated with the warp corruption. The two power systems, Sith sorcery and chaos magic, were feeding each other, creating a hybrid that belonged to neither dimension fully but drew strength from both. This ends now, Mace Windu said, his voice carrying absolute conviction. His lightsaber blazed to life, its purple blade reflecting in his dark eyes. Around him, other Jedi ignited their weapons, ready to charge. Wait, Artemius commanded, his tactical assessment screaming warnings. You cannot fight that entity with conventional weapons. Even your Force powers will be twisted against you. Tsench's servants specialize in corruption. They turn your strengths into weaknesses, your certainties into doubt. Then what do you suggest? Obi-Wan asked, his analytical mind already recognizing the trap. The cultists were bait. The herald was waiting for them to attack, ready to subvert and corrupt whatever powers the Jedi brought to bear. Faith, Thalios said simply. He stepped forward, his Crozius Arcanum raised high, and began to speak. Not in Gothic, the Imperium's standard language, but in something older, sacred, words that had been spoken across 40 millennia of warfare against chaos, liturgies that predated the Imperium itself, prayers from Terra's age of strife, when mankind first learned to fight the warp with nothing but belief and will. The effect was immediate. The herald recoiled, its partially manifested form flickering like a failing hologram. The cultists began to scream, their connection to the warp disrupted by the raw psychic force of absolute conviction. Because that was what Thalios wielded, not force powers or technological superiority, but faith so pure and certain that it became a weapon in itself. The Emperor protects, Thalios intoned, and his words carried weight that transcended meaning. The Emperor knows all. The Emperor judges all. And by his divine will, I cast you back to the hell that spawned you. The Crozius Arcanum struck the herald's manifestation point. The weapon was not particularly powerful by Imperial standards, essentially a power maul that could disrupt energy fields. But in the hands of a true believer, channeling faith as tangible force, it became something more. It became condemnation made manifest. The herald screamed, a sound that existed across multiple dimensions simultaneously. Its form began to dissolve, unable to maintain cohesion under the onslaught of absolute certainty. The cultists collapsed, their minds unable to process the sudden severing of their warp connection. And the stolen holocrons, caught in the psychic backlash, cracked and shattered. But the herald was not defeated, merely denied. As it retreated back through the breach in reality, it spoke with voices that layered atop each other like discordant music. The changer sees all paths, all possibilities, all futures. Your precious republic falls in 3 days. Your Jedi Order burns. And the one you call Palpatine shall reshape this galaxy in ways that please the architect of fate. You cannot stop what has already been set in motion. The die is cast. The game is won. And we, Artemius's bolt pistol barked once. The mass reactive round punched through the herald's partially physical form, detonating in what passed for its chest. The entity's speech cut off mid-word as it was forcibly banished. The warp breach, sealing with a sound like reality, sighing in relief. They talk too much, Artemius observed, holstering his weapon. In my experience, demons who monologue are usually stalling. Either they're trying to corrupt you through conversation, or they're buying time for some other scheme. Best to silence them quickly. The Jedi stared at the unconscious cultists, at the shattered artifacts, at the scorch marks where something from beyond had attempted to take root in their temple. Several knights looked physically ill. Others were shaking, adrenaline and fear mixing in equal measure. What did it mean? Anakin asked, his voice tight. 3 days until the Republic falls. The Jedi Order burns? That can't be right. We're winning the Clone Wars. The Separatists are in retreat. There's no threat that could. Unless the threat isn't external, Obi-Wan said quietly, his analytical mind piecing together fragments of evidence. The herald mentioned Palpatine specifically. Why would a chaos entity know the Chancellor's name? Why would it claim he would reshape the galaxy? Because he's the threat, Yoda said, entering the chamber with visible effort, leaning heavily on his Jimmer stick. The ancient master looked older than his 900 years, as if the psychic assault had drained decades from his life. Blind, we have been. Arrogant. Sensed darkness in the Senate, we did. Felt a Sith presence growing, but never suspected, never imagined. He met Artemius's gaze. Palpatine is a Sith Lord, isn't he? Your cultures may differ, but recognize evil, a warrior can. Sensed it in him, you did. From the beginning. Artemius nodded slowly. We suspected. The way he moved, the void where his emotions should be in the Force. The strategic positioning of clone forces that served no tactical purpose but placed them perfectly to eliminate Jedi commanders. But we had no proof. And your Republic's political structures prevented us from acting on suspicion alone. The clone army, Mace said, pieces clicking into place with horrible clarity. The clones are distributed across the entire Republic military. They're with Jedi generals on 1,000 worlds. If Palpatine has some way to turn them against us. Inhibitor chips, Apothecary Helix said, his medical knowledge providing the answer. I examined several clones during my time here. Fascinating specimens, genetically identical, behaviorally modified, remarkably stable despite the accelerated aging. But there's a control chip implanted in their brains. Your medical files claim it prevents aggressive behavior, but that's a lie. Those chips are for behavioral control, for overriding loyalty and free will with hard-coded commands. Order 66. Anakin breathed, his force-enhanced intuition leaping ahead. Execute the Jedi. That's what it is, isn't it? A command buried in every clone's programming. One order, and 3 million soldiers turn on their Jedi generals simultaneously. The silence that followed was deafening. Impossible, Ki-Adi-Mundi protested, but his voice lacked conviction. The clones are loyal. They fought beside us for 3 years. They're our friends, our brothers in arms. They wouldn't have a choice, Helix interrupted. The chips override conscious thought. They turn your loyal friends into perfect assassins who will kill you without hesitation, remorse, or memory of having loved you. It's brutally efficient, horrifyingly pragmatic, and exactly the kind of plan a Sith would devise. We must warn the other Jedi, Shak Ti said, already moving toward the communications array. Get the word out across the galaxy. Every Jedi needs to know that the clones might turn on them. That Palpatine. No, the word came from Yoda, carrying such authority that even Shak Ti stopped mid-stride. Rush into this, we cannot. Alert Palpatine that we know, and trigger Order 66 immediately, he might kill us all before we can mount a defense. Calculated, our response must be swift, surgical, decisive. You're planning a coup, Obi-Wan said, his voice flat. You're talking about arresting the Supreme Chancellor of the Republic, the democratically elected leader of. I'm talking about survival, Yoda interrupted, his ancient eyes hard. Learn much from our ultramarine allies, I have. Harsh truths, uncomfortable realities. Sometimes, Master Kenobi, to preserve what we cherish, do what we loathe, we must. Remove Palpatine from power, we will. Deactivate the inhibitor chips, we must. Save the Jedi Order, we shall. And let history judge us for the means we employ. Artemius felt a surge of grim satisfaction. Finally, the Jedi were beginning to understand. We're learning the lessons that 40 millennia of warfare had taught the Imperium, that survival required hard choices, that ideals were luxuries purchased with pragmatic brutality, that sometimes the only way to preserve civilization was to temporarily abandon the principles that made it worth preserving. You will need military support, Artemius said. Palpatine won't surrender peacefully. If he's truly a Sith Lord, he'll have powers you can barely imagine. And if he's also learned to tap into chaos, as that herald suggested. He didn't finish the thought. He didn't need to. Then we bring overwhelming force, Mace said, his expression carved from stone. Jedi Masters, clone units we know are uncompromised. And he looked at Artemius, the Emperor's Space Marines. Combined arms, multiple attack vectors. We hit him before he knows we're coming, with enough power to end this in seconds rather than minutes. The Codex Astartes supports this strategy, Artemius confirmed. Strike hard, strike fast. Allow no time for the enemy to adapt or call for reinforcements. But understand, if Palpatine has truly merged Sith and Chaos power, if he's created a hybrid corruption, that draws from both your dark side and the warp. He paused, letting the weight of his next words sink in. Then we may not survive this. Any of us. But at least we'll die knowing. We tried to stop something worse than mere political tyranny. Plans were made with ruthless efficiency. Mace Windu would lead the arrest team for Council Masters, including Kit Fisto and Aegon Kohler. Anakin would remain at the temple with Yoda, coordinating defensive measures in case Order 66 triggered during the operation. Obi-Wan would begin discreet communications with trusted Jedi across the galaxy, warning them to be cautious around their clone troops without revealing the full scope of the conspiracy, and the Ultramarines would serve as backup, a final resort. If the Jedi's attempt to arrest Palpatine failed, one question, Anakin said as the War Council prepared to disperse. If Palpatine is this powerful, if he's been planning this for decades, why hasn't he already won? Why wait? Why give us time to discover his plan? Thalios's response chilled the room, because he wasn't waiting for military victory. He was waiting for the right moment to ascend, to complete whatever ritual or transformation would let him tap into both Sith and Chaos power fully. The Herald said 3 days. That's how long we have before Palpatine becomes something more than a Sith Lord, something that makes the Horus Heresy look like a minor border skirmish. Then we have no time to waste, Mace said, his hand resting on his lightsaber. May the Force be with us. And may the Emperor protect, Artemius added. Both prayers, from vastly different faiths, carried the same desperate hope that their gods, whatever form they took, would grant them the strength to face what was coming. In his Senate office, Darth Sidious felt the shift in the Force, felt the Jedi moving against him, felt their plans crystallizing. And he laughed. Perfect. Absolutely perfect. They thought they were being proactive, taking the initiative, catching him off guard. They didn't realize they were doing exactly what he wanted. The arrest attempt would give him the perfect justification for Order 66. The Jedi would be branded as traitors attempting to overthrow the Republic, and in the chaos that followed, he would reveal his true power, would show them what Sith mastery combined with chaos corruption could achieve, would demonstrate that their puny Force abilities were nothing compared to the reality warping might he had cultivated. Darth Sidious had spent decades preparing for this moment, and now, with the Ultramarines, providing both inspiration and raw material for his apotheosis, the galaxy would finally understand that democracy was an illusion, freedom was weakness, and only through absolute power, guided by the singular vision of one sufficiently ruthless to seize it, could civilization be perfected. Order 66 would execute in 48 hours. Not 3 days as the Herald had claimed. That was misdirection. Cientian lies to make his enemies think they had more time than they did. And when the Jedi came to arrest him tomorrow evening, as he knew they would, he would be ready. He would show them what a true Dark Lord could do. The Senate office tower stood against Coruscant's eternal twilight like a monument to democracy, elegant, open, transparent. Everything the coming regime would not be. Mace Windu led his team through corridors that should have been familiar, but now felt alien, as if the building itself recognized the terrible purpose they carried. Behind him walked Kit Fisto, Aegon Kohler, and C.C. Tyan, 3 of the Order's finest warriors, masters whose lightsaber skills had been honed across decades of combat. And flanking them, their ceramite boots thundering ominously on polished floors, Brother Captain Artemius and Chaplain Thalios represented the Imperium's uncompromising judgment. The Chancellor is in his private office, a Senate guard reported, seemingly oblivious to the tension radiating from the Jedi. He's alone, reviewing legislative proposals for tomorrow's session. Stand down, Mace commanded. What we must do, we do without witnesses. For the Republic's sake, this must be contained. The guard hesitated, sensing something wrong. But Mace's Force-enhanced persuasion pushed him gently aside. They would apologize later. Explain later. Right now, every second mattered. The private office doors were ornate wood inlaid with precious metals, beautiful, expensive, and utterly inadequate as defensive barriers. Mace didn't knock. He simply pushed them open with the Force, his purple blade igniting as he crossed the threshold. Chancellor Palpatine sat behind his desk, illuminated by the soft glow of datapads displaying Republic legislation. He looked up with apparent surprise, his elderly features arranged in confused concern. Master Windu? What is the meaning of this intrusion? Has something happened? Is the temple under attack again? You know exactly what this is about, Mace said, his voice hard. We know what you are, Palpatine. We know about Order 66. About the inhibitor chips. About your plans to destroy the Jedi Order and remake the Republic as your empire. He advanced slowly, his lightsaber held in a perfect Vapad stance. In the name of the Galactic Senate of the Republic, you are under arrest. For a long moment, silence filled the office. Then Palpatine's expression shifted, the grandfatherly concern melting away like wax, revealing something ancient and terrible beneath. Are you threatening me, Master Jedi? His voice had changed too, deepening with power and malice that had always lurked behind the political mask. The Senate will decide your fate, Mace replied, though his grip on his lightsaber tightened. I am the Senate. The words hung in the air for a heartbeat. Then Palpatine moved. He was impossibly fast, faster than any being his apparent age should move, faster than the Jedi's precognition could fully track. A lightsaber appeared in his hand as if summoned from nothing, its blade burning crimson, and he launched himself across the desk with a shriek of pure hatred that transcended sound to become psychic assault. Aegon Kohler died first. The Zabrak master barely had time to raise his blade before Palpatine's cut through his defense, the red blade punching through his chest with surgical precision. C.C. Tyon fell seconds later, his Itachi reflexes meaning nothing against an opponent who moved beyond normal physics. Kit Fisto managed to engage for precious seconds, his nautolan flexibility and form a mastery allowing him to avoid the initial onslaught. But Palpatine was relentless, his attacks flowing from one form to another without pause, combining Makashi's precision with Juyo's ferocity with techniques that predated the Jedi Order itself. "You were fools to come here," Palpatine hissed, his voice layered with dark side power. "Did you think I was unprepared? Did you believe I wouldn't sense your pathetic conspiracy?" He batted aside Kit Fisto's blade and drove his lightsaber through the master's heart. "I have been planning this for decades. And you?" He turned his full attention to Mace. "You walk into my office with nothing but arrogance and 3 corpses." Mace Windu stood his ground, his Vapad form channeling the dark side energy. Palpatine radiated and turning it against him. This was what made Mace dangerous, his ability to dance on the edge of darkness without falling, to use his opponent's power as fuel for his own attacks. "You're not the only one who's been preparing," Mace said, his blade meeting Palpatine's in a shower of sparks. "And you're right, I didn't come with just 3 Jedi." The wall exploded inward, not from thermal detonators or Republic weapons, but from something far more brutal, a croc missile fired from Brother Sergeant Octavian's launcher. The shaped charge was designed to punch through tank armor against the Senate office's reinforced walls. It created an entrance large enough for 3 Ultramarines to storm through simultaneously. Palpatine's eyes widened fractionally, the first genuine surprise he'd shown. "Space Marines? How unexpected. Tell me, Captain, does your Emperor approve of you interfering in other governments' internal affairs?" "The Emperor," Artemius replied, his bolt pistol trained on Palpatine's center mass, "approves of exterminating chaos corruption wherever it manifests. And you, Chancellor, reek of the warp. Whatever you've done, whatever power you've bargained for, it's marked you as clearly as any cultist we've purged." Palpatine laughed, a sound like breaking glass and screaming metal. "Chaos? Is that what you call it? How limited your perspective is, Captain. I have studied the dark side for 50 years, mastered every Sith technique passed down through millennia. And recently, thanks to your arrival, I've had access to something new. Something that makes Sith power look like children playing with training sabers." He raised his free hand, and reality fractured. The warp shouldn't have responded to him. This galaxy's psychic realm followed different rules, operated on different principles. But Palpatine had found the bridge, the place where dark side and chaos overlapped, where Sith sorcery and demonic corruption could merge into something unprecedented. Lightning erupted from his fingertips. But this wasn't the blue force lightning the Jedi had documented in ancient texts. This was something else, streams of energy that burned with colors that hurt to perceive, that crackled with whispers and languages that predated language itself. Where the lightning struck, reality warped. Metal turned to flesh. Stone liquefied. The air itself screamed in frequencies that bypassed ears to attack sanity directly. "Behold," Palpatine roared, his voice harmonizing with itself in impossible octaves. "I have done what no Sith Lord ever achieved. I have opened the door between your warp and our force. I have learned to draw power from both simultaneously. I am become Death, the destroyer of Jedi, the architect of a new order that will span not just this galaxy, but potentially yours as well." The warp lightning struck Artemius's armor, and the ceramite began to corrupt. Purity seals ignited. Holy inscriptions twisted into blasphemous variations. The captain staggered, feeling the corruption trying to seep through his armor, to touch the flesh beneath, to corrupt the very gene seed that made him transhuman. But then Chaplain Thalios stepped forward, his Crozius Arcanum blazing with faith made manifest. "You are powerful, Sith Lord, but you are not a god. You draw on chaos without understanding it. Wield the warp without the protection that 40 millennia of faith provides. You are a psyker playing with forces beyond your comprehension. And like all unsanctioned psykers, his weapon descended. You will burn. The Crozius struck Palpatine's lightning, and the two powers collided with reality-shaking force. The Sith Lord's hybrid corruption met the chaplain's absolute faith, and neither side gave ground. But the collision created an opening, a fraction of a second where Palpatine's attention was divided. Mace Windu seized it. His lightsaber, supercharged with channeled dark-side energy through Vapad's unique mechanics, swept toward Palpatine's extended arm. The blade, designed to cut through nearly anything, should have severed the limb cleanly. Instead, it met resistance. Palpatine's dark-side augmentation, providing durability beyond mortal flesh. But it cut deep enough. The warp lightning faltered, and Palpatine, wounded for the first time in decades, screamed with rage rather than pain. You dare? You dare? His form began to change. The elderly statesman facade burning away to reveal what lurked beneath. His face twisted, skin pulling tight over bone, eyes burning yellow with unrestrained hatred. I am Darth Sidious. I am the culmination of the Sith's 1,000-year plan. I am the bridge between realities. And you? Artemius's bolt pistol roared. The mass-reactive round struck Palpatine in the shoulder. The explosive charge detonating and tearing away a chunk of flesh that should have been lethal. But Palpatine remained standing, his body held together by dark-side energy and something else. Warp corruption that refused to let his physical form die. Impressive, Sidious admitted, his voice bubbling through damaged lungs. But insufficient. You see, I've already won. Even as we speak, Order 66 is being transmitted. Across 1,000 worlds, Jedi are dying. Your precious order is being erased. And when I emerge from this office, wounded but victorious against the Jedi coup attempt, I will be declared Emperor with unanimous approval. You're bluffing, Mace said, though uncertainty crept into his voice. We disabled the central communications array. You can't transmit Order 66 from here. From here? No. Sidious smiled, blood staining his teeth. But I've had redundancies for years. Backup transmission facilities. Sleeper agents in the military hierarchy. Did you really think I would place all my plans in one vulnerable location? He gestured, and a holographic display activated, showing clone units across the galaxy suddenly turning their weapons on their Jedi commanders. Behold, Master Windu, your failure made manifest. The images were horrifying. On Felucia, Aayla Secura fell to concentrated blaster fire from her own troops. On Mygeeto, Ki-Adi-Mundi was gunned down while leading a charge. On Cato Neimoidia, Plo Koon's starfighter exploded as his clone pilot deliberately shot him down. World after world, death after death, the Jedi Order, 10,000 strong, being systematically executed by soldiers they had trusted as brothers. No, Mace breathed, his concentration faltering. No, this can't be. Sidious struck. His lightsaber, abandoned during the Force lightning assault, flew back to his hand and slashed toward Mace's exposed flank. But before it connected, a ceramite gauntlet intercepted the blade. Chaplain Thalios's armored hand caught the plasma blade, his faith and armor's protection, allowing him to hold the weapon for precious seconds. Captain, Thalios said calmly, even as the lightsaber began burning through his gauntlet. Now would be an optimal time for that orbital strike you requested. Artemius allowed himself a grim smile. Brother Vastian, you have the coordinates. Fire. High above Coruscant, the sword of Makridge had been waiting. Its lance batteries, capable of glassing continents, had been aimed at the Senate building for the past hour. At Artemius's command, one lance, only one, with the targeting precision that 40,000 years of naval warfare had perfected, speared down from orbit. The beam struck the Senate office tower with the force of a small nuclear weapon. But it was contained, focused, surgical. The upper floors vaporized instantly. The structure collapsed. Millions of tons of durasteel and ferrocrete crushing down on a single point, where Darth Sidious had stood seconds before. Artemius's armor's teleport. Homer had activated, simultaneously, a short-range emergency extraction system that transported the Ultramarines and Mace Windu to a preset location 3 kilometers away. They materialized on a temple landing platform, smoking and battered but alive. Mace collapsed to his knees, his lightsaber clattering from nerveless fingers. "The Order," he whispered. "The Jedi are dying." "We were too late." "Not too late," Yoda's voice said from behind them. The Grand Master stood with Obi-Wan, Anakin, and dozens of other Jedi, survivors who had been at the temple when Order 66 triggered, who had been warned just in time to defend themselves against their clone escorts. Save some we did. Perhaps half the Order still lives. Scattered across the galaxy, but alive. Failed, we have not. But victorious we are not either. And Sidious? Obi-Wan asked, looking at the smoking crater where the Senate Tower had stood. Dead, Artemius said with certainty. No being survives a direct lance strike. Whatever dark side powers he possessed, whatever chaos corruption he'd embraced, he's gone. But even as he spoke, Artemius felt doubt creeping in. Because he'd seen too much, fought too long, to believe evil could be eliminated so cleanly. Chaos, in his experience, never truly died. It adapted. It persisted. It waited. And somewhere in the warp, something that had been Darth Sidious but was now something more, something that had transcended physical death through sheer malevolent will and dark power, began to plan its return. The Battle of Coruscant was over, but the war for the galaxy's soul had only just begun. The Jedi Temple burned, not from external attack, but from within, a controlled purge overseen by Master Yoda himself as the surviving Jedi systematically destroyed every record, every artifact, every piece of knowledge that might aid the newly declared Empire in hunting them down. The Great Library, repository of 10,000 years of wisdom, was reduced to ash. The meditation chambers were collapsed. The training halls were stripped of everything that might reveal Jedi techniques to their enemies. It was a death, not of the Order. 5,000 Jedi had survived Order 66, scattered across the galaxy, but of everything the Order had been. The peacekeepers were gone. The diplomats were finished. What remained were fugitives, survivors, and soldiers of a rebellion that didn't yet exist. On the temple's highest platform, Brother Captain Artemius stood with the remnants of the Jedi Council, watching Coruscant transform. Already, Imperial propaganda broadcasts filled every channel, declaring the Jedi traitors who had attempted to assassinate the beloved Chancellor. The Senate, what remained of it, had voted unanimously to grant emergency powers to whoever would lead them through this crisis. And in the absence of Palpatine, that vacuum was being filled by beings whose ambitions had merely been waiting for this moment. "They're calling it the Galactic Empire now," Obi-Wan said quietly, watching the clone units, now rechristened stormtroopers, establish checkpoints across the planet city. Democracy didn't die with thunderous applause. It died in confused silence, with most people not even realizing what they'd lost. Democracy was already dead, Artemius replied, his enhanced vision tracking Imperial movements across dozens of sectors simultaneously. It died the moment your clones were created, the moment you centralized military power, the moment your Senate became paralyzed by corruption and bureaucracy. Palpatine didn't destroy the Republic, Master Kenobi. He simply finished what decay had already begun. Comforting words, Mace Windu said bitterly. The Jedi Master bore a new scar across his face, a wound from Sidious's lightning that Bacta could heal, but would always remind him of his failure. "Tell me, Captain, in your Imperium, how often do you watch civilizations fall because you arrived too late to save them?" "Every day," Artemius admitted. "The Imperium spans 1,000,000 worlds. We cannot be everywhere, cannot save everyone. The best we can do is preserve what matters most, humanity's survival, and accept that individual worlds, individual cultures, individual democracies will fall. It is difficult to reconcile with the values your Jedi espouse, but it is reality. A grim reality," Yoda observed, his ancient eyes fixed on the setting sun, artificial though it was on Coruscant. Yet perhaps needed, these harsh truths were. Complacent, we had become, believed in our own wisdom too much, forgot that vigilance is eternal, that freedom requires constant defense. He turned to face Artemius. "Grateful we are for your warning, for your aid. Without you, all Jedi would have died. Instead, thousands live. Because learned from you, we did. However painful those lessons were. What will you do now? Anakin asked. The young knight had been strangely quiet since Order 66, processing the reality that soldiers he'd fought beside for 3 years had tried to kill him without hesitation or remorse. The Jedi Order is scattered. The Republic is gone. The Empire controls the Senate and the military. You can't fight an entire galaxy. We don't fight the entire galaxy, Obi-Wan corrected. We fight the Empire. Undermine it. Sabotage it. Remind the citizens of what they've lost and inspire them to reclaim it. A rebellion, essentially. The Jedi become symbols of resistance rather than peacekeepers of the status quo. Guerrilla warfare, Chaplain Thalios said approvingly. Asymmetric combat against a superior force. The Imperium has 10,000 years of experience with such conflicts. If you wish, we can provide tactical consultation, training in insurgency operations, methods for surviving when hunted. You would help us? Mace asked, surprise evident in his voice. I thought your goal was to return to your Imperium, to leave our galaxy behind. It is, Artemius confirmed. Brother Vastian has made progress understanding your galaxy's unique properties. We believe that within months, we may be able to safely navigate back to Imperial space. But, he paused, choosing his words carefully. We cannot leave this galaxy to chaos corruption. Sidious may be dead, but his legacy remains. The cult he inspired, the warp force hybrid power he created, the knowledge that chaos can spread here. If we leave without ensuring you have the tools to fight such corruption, then we would be derelict in our duty to the Emperor, Thalios finished. The God Emperor's light must shine wherever humanity struggles against darkness, even in galaxies not our own. So yes, Master Windu, we will help you, teach you our methods, share our experience in fighting chaos. And when we finally depart, we will leave behind knowledge that might save your civilization. In exchange for what? Obi-Wan asked. He'd learned to be suspicious of gifts that seemed too generous. Nothing is free, Captain. What does the Imperium want in return? Artemius smiled slightly. When you win, and you will win, eventually, because the Force itself demands balance, remember what you learned from us. Remember that idealism without pragmatism is suicide. That compassion without strength enables evil. That democracy without vigilance invites tyranny. He gestured to the burning temple, to the Empire consolidating power across Coruscant. Don't let this happen again. Whatever government you build from the Empire's ashes, make it strong. Make it resilient. Make it capable of recognizing and confronting darkness before it metastasizes into existential threat. Build an Imperium, in other words, Mace said dryly. Build whatever you wish, Artemius replied. But build it with open eyes, with recognition that the universe is a hostile place, that evil is real and must be fought, and that survival sometimes requires choices that haunt you forever. That is all we ask, that you learn from our 40,000 years of mistakes, so you don't have to repeat them. Wise counsel, that is, Yoda said. Remember it, I will, as will those who survive to rebuild. He looked at Anakin, at Obi-Wan, at the younger Jedi who would carry the Order into its darkest hour. Different. The Jedi must become stronger, harder, more willing to act decisively against darkness. But lose ourselves, we must not. Become like the Empire, we cannot. Walk the line between light and pragmatism. That is the challenge ahead. A clone, no, a stormtrooper, patrol approached the temple perimeter. The Jedi tensed, hands moving to weapons. But the patrol simply marked their datapad and moved on. Orders had been issued. The temple was to be left alone while the Jedi evacuated. A grace period before the hunters descended in full force. Everyone recognized it for what it was, a trap. Let the Jedi scatter, then track them to their hiding places. Round them up systematically rather than fighting a pitched battle at the temple that might turn public opinion. It was sound strategy. Brutal, but effective. Time to go, Obi-Wan said. The transports are ready. Different destinations for different groups. We scatter to the outer rim, to hidden systems, to places the Empire won't think to look immediately. And you? Artemius asked. Where will the council go? There is no council anymore, Mace said. We're too recognizable, too high profile. We split up. Yoda will go to Dagobah, a planet strong in the Force but far from Imperial attention. I'll head to Ryloth. help organize Twi'lek resistance cells. The others, he shrugged, wherever they're needed, wherever they can do the most good against the Empire. And you, Skywalker? Thalios asked Anakin directly. You've been quiet, processing, doubting. What will you do? Anakin's expression was complex: anger, grief, determination, and something else. Something that made even the chaplain wary. I'm going to fight. The Empire killed my friends, my brothers. They turned the Republic I believed in into a fascist regime. So I'll fight, whatever it takes. However dark the path becomes. I'll fight until the Empire falls, or I do. Careful, Artemius warned. That kind of absolute commitment, it's admirable, necessary even, but it's also dangerous. The line between righteous fury and corruption is thinner than you think. Knight Skywalker, we've seen too many brothers fall because they confused duty with vengeance. I know the difference, Anakin said, though his voice carried an edge of uncertainty. I have to know the difference, because if I lose myself fighting the darkness, then the Empire wins anyway. Before Artemius could respond, alarms screamed from the Sword of Makridge. Brother Vastian's voice crackled urgently over the Vox. Brother Captain, we have a problem. Multiple warp signatures manifesting across Coruscant. Not demons, something else. I'm reading psychic resonance consistent with Sith force powers merged with chaos corruption. It's spreading through the planet's population, creating cultists, turning Imperial citizens into willing servants of the ruinous powers. Sidious's legacy, Thalios breathed. He didn't just die? He seeded this galaxy with corruption before we killed him, created the infrastructure for chaos worship to spread organically, without needing demons or direct warp manifestation. Then the war isn't over, Mace said, his expression hardening. The Empire is one threat. But if chaos cults are spreading, then you need us more than ever. Artemius finished. Brother Vastian, delay our departure preparations. The Sword of Makridge remains in system until further notice. We have work to do. Acknowledged, Brother Captain. Though I must warn you, the longer we remain in this galaxy, the greater the risk that the warp breach we created becomes permanent. If we wait too long, we may never be able to return home. Artemius exchanged glances with his brothers. They all understood the implications. Remain here, fight chaos, and help the Jedi, and potentially doom themselves to exile in a foreign galaxy. Return to the Imperium now and abandon this civilization to corruption and darkness. The Emperor will understand, Thalios said quietly. We serve his will, and his will is that humanity survives, wherever we find it. If we must stay to ensure that survival, then we stay. Agreed, Artemius said. He turned to the assembled Jedi. It seems the Ultramarines will be joining your rebellion, masters, at least until the chaos corruption is contained. Consider us consultants in the art of fighting forces beyond mortal comprehension. Yoda bowed his head. Honored, we are, and grateful. Together, perhaps, save this galaxy, we can. From the Empire's tyranny and chaos's corruption both. Perhaps, Artemius agreed. But it will take years. Decades, possibly. This isn't a war that ends with one battle or one victory. This is the long war, the kind the Imperium has been fighting for 40 millennia. Are you prepared for that, Masters? For a conflict that might outlast your lifetimes. We're Jedi, Obi-Wan said simply. We serve the Force and the people it flows through. For as long as it takes. However high the cost. That's what we do. Artemius nodded. It was the answer he'd hoped for. The answer that proved, despite their philosophical differences, the Jedi and the Adeptus Astartes shared something fundamental, the willingness to sacrifice everything for a cause greater than themselves. As the Jedi began their evacuation, scattering to 1,000 different destinations, the Ultramarines remained. They would hunt the chaos cults spreading through Coruscant's undercity, would teach the Jedi how to recognize and combat warp corruption, would fight alongside this galaxy's defenders until either the threat was eliminated or the Sword of Makridge called. Delay no longer. And somewhere in the warp, in that space between the Force and chaos, in the cracks between realities, something that had been Darth Sidious watched and waited. Death had not ended his ambitions. It had merely transformed them. He had learned the secret that the Sith lords before him had sought but never achieved. True immortality through transcendence. He would return, not as Palpatine, not as Sidious, but as something new, something that combined Sith philosophy, chaos corruption, and pure malevolent will into a being that could reshape reality itself. The Empire would rise and fall. The rebellion would fight and triumph. But in the end, all of it would serve his ultimate purpose, to remake this galaxy, and eventually the Imperium's galaxy as well, into a paradise of absolute order where free will was the only heresy and his vision was the only truth. He had all the time in eternity to make it happen. In the grim darkness of the far future, there was only war. And in a galaxy far, far away, there was only the eternal struggle between light and darkness, order and chaos, hope and despair. But now those two conflicts had merged. Two galaxies, two philosophies, two types of corruption, all colliding in ways that neither universe had anticipated. The Jedi would learn to fight like space marines, brutal, pragmatic, uncompromising. The Ultramarines would learn to wield hope like a weapon, to understand that faith alone, without the vision of a better future, was merely zealotry. And together, they would face threats that neither could have survived alone. The Clone Wars were over. The age of the Empire had begun. And in the shadows, the long war continued, older than civilizations, deeper than space, eternal as the forces that drove sentient beings to choose between salvation and damnation. But through it all, one truth remained. Hope shone brightest in the darkest night. Whether that light came from the God Emperor's Astronomicon or the living force itself, whether it was expressed through bolter fire or lightsaber strikes, whether it demanded brutal pragmatism or compassionate idealism, hope persisted. And as long as hope endured, darkness could never fully win. The sword of Makridge remained in orbit above Coruscant for 3 more years, its Gothic silhouette a constant reminder that the galaxy had changed forever. Brother Captain Artemius and his Ultramarines became legends. In the nascent rebellion, the Angels of Death who taught the Jedi to fight without mercy, who hunted chaos cults through 1,000 worlds, who proved that faith and hope were not opposites but complementary weapons against darkness. When Brother Vastian finally perfected the calculations needed for safe warp translation, when the sword of Makridge prepared to depart this galaxy for their Imperium, the farewell was bittersweet. The Jedi had learned brutality. The Ultramarines had learned hope. Both had been changed by the encounter in ways that would echo across millennia. Remember what we taught you, Artemius said to the assembled rebel leaders, Bail Organa, Mon Mothma, and a corps of Jedi, survivors including Obi-Wan and Yoda. Vigilance, pragmatism, the willingness to make hard choices. But also, he glanced at Chaplain Thalios, who nodded. Remember that those hard choices should haunt you. The moment you stop feeling the weight of what you do, the moment brutality becomes easy, you've lost what made you worth defending in the first place. Carry your wisdom back to your Imperium. We will, Yoda replied. Tell your Emperor that not all is grim darkness, that even in the long war, moments of light exist, that hope is not weakness but strength, and that 40,000 years of warfare have perhaps closed certain eyes to possibilities that still exist. As the sword of Makridge engaged its warp drives and tore through reality back toward the Imperium, both galaxies were forever altered. The chaos cults that Sidious had seeded would be hunted for generations, requiring eternal vigilance. The Empire would eventually fall to rebellion, then rise again in different forms, the cycle continuing as it always had. But now, the Jedi Order, rebuilt, in the aftermath of Imperial collapse, carried within it lessons. From the Adeptus Astartes, they trained harder, questioned less, acted more decisively against darkness. They never became the Imperium's brutal pragmatists, but they weren't the idealistic peacekeepers either. They had found a middle path, and in finding it, they ensured that when darkness inevitably returned, they would be ready. In the warp between galaxies, forces beyond mortal comprehension observed and planned. Chaos had found a new playground. The dark side had learned new tricks, and the ancient conflict between order and entropy continued, as it always would, across infinity.